to serve as a hearing examiner on this matter. The purpose of this hearing today is on the assessment roll that has been issued, the assessments for the LID on the Klickitat Road Improvement Project there along I-5. We have today 8 groups that are here to appeal their assessment, and the notices have been provided, and we received in writing a total of 8 groups that would like to appeal. Under the rules, everyone that wanted to appeal was required to file a written appeal by a certain deadline, and that has been satisfied by the individual groups or property owners represented, and I'll go through that list today. Let's see. To my right, I have Christy O'Flaherty, who is the city clerk for the city of Tukwila. She probably signed a lot of the notices that you received and things like that. And Danny? Is that Randy? Randy. And we have a court reporter here today named Randy, who is seated over here to my right, and you see her, she's clicking away. And the purpose for that is there is a transcript being made today of today's proceedings. So no one should, if you feel there's something important you want to share, it's going to be an organized hearing process, no one should speak out of turn, over each other, or anywhere except at one of these designated microphones. The microphone that is in front of me here at this table is where witnesses and people who wish to make presentations will be speaking from. And so everyone can hear, and if you want a transcript of the proceedings, you'll have to order that at the end if for any reason you choose to move forward and challenge things for whatever, or you want the transcript when it goes up to the city council, or if you chose to take it to Superior Court as the process may step forward. We want to make sure we have a clear transcript, so I will ask you to state your names and spell them the first time you appear. And you do have a sign-in sheet that everybody, I think, has used today, and ask that you would so we can double-check, make sure we get spelling right. Because this hearing involves a number of parties, I'm going to need to organize things a little bit. We did not have a pre-hearing process, so we will have one here this morning. To sort of help me assess how many people, how many experts, how many witnesses, how many documents, what sort of records you might be trying to introduce into the record, so we can establish a time budget to sort of decide, are we going to need time limits or not? Is that necessary or not? We've advertised the hearing. It starts today. It will continue as long as it needs to until it closes, in my judgment, and we should be able to decide this morning about how much time we're going to need. It's advertised for a day. We may be able to finish it today. My hope is to conclude things by no later than 5 o'clock today. But if we need to go on and continue to another date certain, I will announce that here in the hearing, and you will be on notice based on what's announced here in this hearing on the record as to what date and time it might be continued to. If anyone is going to come forward today and ask for a continuance of any sort for any purpose whatsoever, you need to let me know. And I will give the city an opportunity to respond, object, or concur in whatever requests you might have to make. But this is the hearing, this is the date, and if you don't, this is sort of like the wedding. If you speak now or forever hold your peace, this is your turn to make that record, okay? If you have any experts that you intend to bring forward, appraisers or anybody of that sort, it's your responsibility to have them here. If they're not here now and you know that they've had traffic problems, or there's for some reason they're going to show up at 10:30 or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and you already know that, if I can accommodate that reasonably with other people, I will do my best to do so, but I'm not making any promises, okay? It's only if things work out right, I can do that for you. But because the purpose is to try to get everything fit in as best we can. So I think the most helpful thing to me right now at this point would be, let me go down and recognize or state to you what I have before me as the listed appellants and the properties that are represented. And if you are the representative or the person who's here to speak on that property owner's behalf, raise your hand and let me know who you are, okay? So we'll try and find out who those are. The first is a group, and I believe there are 4 properties. If I got the number wrong, let me know. And we'll call these the Macy's properties. So who is here today on behalf of Macy's? Would you stand, sir, and tell us who you are?
My name is Larry Schramm. I'm the Director of Property Tax.
Okay, and Larry, how do you spell Schramm?
SCHRAM.
Okay, all right. And do you have anybody with you today on behalf of Macy's, an appraiser or anybody of that sort? Okay. Do you have any written records or materials?
A couple pages document.
Just a few pages, not books or volumes? Okay. All right. And about how much time do you think you will need to make your presentation today?
My estimate, 15, 20 minutes probably.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The next property I have, and this is just in a list, I think, based on when you received them, I think. Let's see, Scarbo Holdings. All right. Yes, sir. And you are?
I'm Ron Scarborough.
You're Mr. Scarbo. And you're here on behalf of one property, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And will you be speaking as the only individual, or do you have any experts or other people that you wish to present?
I haven't planned on speaking.
Okay. You don't plan on speaking? Okay. All right. And you don't have anybody else either?
No.
And do you have any records or materials or exhibits that you want to use today?
No.
Okay. Oh, and I want to let folks know, we do have a computer set up here and a screen, so if anyone had a PowerPoint or any other kind of illustrative electronic exhibits or anything of that sort, that can be accommodated. You'll just let me know as I'm doing this round robin with you if that's something you plan to do. And we take a break of a minute or two when it's your turn to come up so you can get everything ready to go. Mr. Scarbo, did you have a question?
Well, I submitted my written appeal, and I assume that was all I would do.
Okay, well, I have that, but you have the opportunity to speak or bring experts of your choosing or other people if you wish. Yeah, okay, all right. That holds for everybody. So, all right, again, this is just sort of a roll call so you all can let me know what kind of things you might expect to bring. Next I have, is it Mr. Rosenfeld for Andover West Properties? Okay, and you're Mr. Rosenfeld?
I am.
Yes, sir.
Was this morning anyway.
Okay. All right. And on behalf of Andover West, do you anticipate any other experts or individuals besides yourself speaking or making presentations today?
No, I'll be fine doing it myself.
Okay. All right. And about how much time do you think you'd like to make your presentation?
3 minutes maximum.
Okay. All right. Is it Houghton Harbor or Houghton Harbor? Is Matt Peterson in the room? An appeal for a property located at 1251 Andover Park West in 5920 South 180th. Is anyone here on behalf of that property? Okay. Seeing no one, I'll move on to the next. It looks like the property ownership group, I guess, is Wide Waters Group, Inc. Is anyone here on behalf of that group? Patrick Lawless, anybody here? Okay. And if, Christy, if you or any of your assistants notice that some people come in and they identify themselves as with those groups, if they'd let me know when you find out. The next group we have would be on behalf of the Archdiocese of Seattle. And I'd take it you're not Ed Foster. Who might you be, ma'am?
Laura Tepfer.
Could you speak up
Yes, Laura Tepfer,
and spell your last name?
T-O-E-P-F-E-R.
And that said Tabfer? Did I get that right? Okay. And on behalf of the Archdiocese, will you be the only individual speaking, or will there be others?
From the Vietnamese Martyrs Church.
Okay.
The Vietnamese Martyrs. I'm Ken Nguyen, K-I-E-N-N-G-U-Y-E-N.
And Ms. Topfer, do you have any experts or any exhibits or materials, or no? Okay. Just you. And about how much time do you think you'd like today?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. The next property is 1224 Andover Park. Is Harris Klein present? Mr. Klein? Nope. Okay. And the next property group was the Sigali property group. And who do we have here?
Good morning, I'm Jamie Ballant. I'm company counsel for Savali Properties.
Is that, and last name?
Ballant, spelled B as in boy, A-L-I-N-T.
And will the Sagali Properties be making a presentation today, or Mr. Deason?
Mr. Examiner, the city and Sigali have discussed this matter. Based upon the objections that have been filed, city staff will require some additional time to look into that. And so the parties are going to request a deferral of the hearing today with regard to that property. Hopefully the parties will be able to settle this matter and avoid the need for a hearing. But if not, the parties would so notify the city and yourself and schedule a hearing if necessary at a mutually convenient time.
Is that something you all think is going to be accomplished in 14 days or beyond?
There's no way of knowing for sure. If I were to make an educated guess, it would probably take a little bit longer than that.
Okay. All right. So I will hold that in reserve. And Ms. Ballant, do you have any remarks?
Yes,
Follow up?
I agree with Mr. Deason. We're willing to give the city as much time as they need to review our objections and respond, and we certainly hope we can work things out amicably. Of course, I want to reserve the right to present additional argument or evidence to yourself should we not be able to reach an agreement.
But you're going to elect not to build a record today. You're going to reserve to do that at a date in the future.
Correct.
Okay. And I'll grant you that right based on the representation of the city's council, Mr. Deason, and you, Ms. Ballant, today on behalf of the Sagali Properties Group. And there were a number of parcels represented, correct?
31.
Yeah, okay. I have the list here, and the record will reflect that all of those are inclusive and consolidated into the Sagali appeals, okay.
And note that there is one parcel that we are not objecting to the assessment for.
Oh, that isn't listed, okay. All right. That shall be noted. Thank you.
We may have had someone arrive from the Andover company, Mr. Rockwell.
All right, now I'm going to circle back and see if people have come in. Was it Andover? No.
Andover company, George Rockwell. I didn't see this person speak today, so
Yeah.
I want to verify.
Mr. Rosenfeld, you're here on behalf of Andover, correct? Andover
West.
West. And then I have another Andover company. Did somebody come in? If so, yes. And who do you represent, sir?
George Rockwell, Andover Company.
And which property are you affiliated with? Which appeal?
Well, I was just going to make a general comment. I have a variety of properties. I represent a number of owners, so I don't know if this is appropriate.
Not right now.
Okay.
What I'm doing now, and I don't think you were in the room, what I'm doing is I'm going through the list of the property owners that actually filed written appeals.
Okay, but I will not be speaking
So you did not file a written appeal?
on a particular property.
Okay, all right. So has anyone come into the room representing the Houghton Harbor LLC group? Nope. Anybody come in representing Wide Waters Group? Okay, and Harris Klein? Nobody? Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like everybody indicated how much time. I think we should be able to accommodate your time. And I'm not going to put a time limit on you unless I see you're hitting 10 or 15 minutes. I'm probably going to ask you to wrap up. So here's my proposed process today. In this proceeding, which is supposed to result in a recommendation from me with findings and recommendations to the Tukwila City Council on whether they should affirm or modify in some way the assessment that your individual properties have received for this LID project. To do that today at the hearing, the burden of proof is on the city to show what your assessment is, how they came to achieve that number, and what they did to tell you about it. And so the city will move first, and I will allow them a time to make presentation. And I should ask Mr. Deason on behalf of the city about how much time do you all think you'll need? I mean, and this is just a presentation, not questions.
25 to 30 minutes.
Easy. Okay. So I'm not going to put a time limit on that. And I am going to allow narrative testimony. because it's probably more in the form of a presentation. And if you have exhibits that you want to enter, please let us know. The city clerk is here to mark them and label them. And any exhibits that are entered are, of course, public records. And if you have not filed a public record request for it today, I'm not going to require you to do that here at the hearing, but on breaks, I will let you thumb through whatever there is. If copies aren't made available to all of you present, as it pertains to your property, you may want to look at that. And let me know if it's something large. We'll try to accommodate requests to see if you need to get yourself ready for whatever you're going to say. After the city's presentation, will come a time for questions. And I'm going to allow each property to ask questions if you want to. Again, I probably won't start with a time limit, but if it looks like you're going on and getting long in the tooth, I'm probably going to impose one so we can move to the next property and let them get their questions on the record as well. Question time is not your presentation time, and it won't count against you, okay? I'm only suggesting that this is probably a better way to do it than have the presentation and all your presentations and then questions. Mr. Deason, do you object?
No.
Okay. So we will get the city's presentation forward, and then property owners will be allowed to ask questions of the city's representatives that pertain to your properties, okay? And the only participants today will be the 8 appellants that are listed, and if some of those that are absent come in, somebody nudge me and let me know. But a representative for each property group will be allowed to come forward and place a question on the record to any of the city representatives that you have. After all the question time is gone, or your questions are exhausted, and by the way, we'll take a logical break here sometime. Between now and lunchtime, we'll take a lunch break. If we're not done by then, I don't know that we will, but, and then through the day we can take breaks. And if people have special needs or anything of that sort, you've got an urgent matter that you need to tend to, for whatever reason you're in the middle of something, let me know. I will do my best to accommodate that or move things around. And if I'm going down an order and one of you needs to switch order for some reason for your own personal needs, let me know and I'll try to accommodate that. But speak up. I can't help you if you don't let me know that you need something, okay? So after the question time with the city people is concluded, I will then let each of the property owners come make your presentation. And again, the electronic media is available if anybody chooses to do that. You thought about it, you didn't, you're happy to have it emailed and get it ready to go. This is your chance to bring forward arguments, questions, and evidence that shows why your assessment is not correct. Is there a mistake? Is there some other expert material that you think is more persuasive than what the city has used? And the burden of proof is quite high if the city comes forward with appraisals. So if you are an expert, if you have experience in this field, if you know your property and know yourself to be an expert, if you know yourself to be a person of experience, of knowledge and wherewithal in determining values of properties before and after different changes are made, you need to let me know that. Because if you fail to do that, you may not be meeting your burden of proof to overcome the evidence the city might bring forward. So the burden is on you as the property owner to come forward and tell us why there might be a mistake and tell us what evidence you have to show how or what should be changed, okay? And that's all on you. So you will be doing that during your presentations. And after your presentations are done, I will let the city representatives ask you questions if they choose to do so. After all of your presentations are done, if the city wishes to do any kind of rebuttal, they will have an opportunity to do a follow-up. And if some of you feel like there's some compelling reason that you heard something new and you want to respond to that, I will probably give you a chance to do that too, until all sides feel that they have had an opportunity to establish the record that they need on this proceeding, okay? So are there any questions before we start? Any objections to the process that I've generally outlined for you? Yes, sir. Will everybody be introduced? Yes. That would be a good idea. No, that's fine. That's fine. So, Mr. Schramm, we'll go around. Again, I'm Gary McLean, your hearing examiner. You can call me Mr. McLean or examiner, whatever you want, whatever makes you most comfortable, or hey you, but, you know, we are on a formal record and somebody might be reading this in the future, so watch your words. And Christy?
I'm Christy O'Flaherty, the city clerk.
Okay. And to my left?
Bob Giberson, City of Tukwila Public Works Director.
Bruce Deason, serving as the city attorney for this proceeding.
Bob McCauley with McCauley Associates, we did the special benefit study.
And Mr. McCauley, would you briefly, slowly spell your name?
Yeah, give her cards, MACAULAY.
Okay. And if you don't mind, should we just go around the room and see who's here?
My name is Scott Phillips, and I'm here as an observer for informative reasons.
Okay.
My name is Steve Page. I'm also just here to listen.
Okay.
David Klein, I'm the Tukwila City Administrator.
Okay.
Dana Oliver-Gideon, I'm city clerk's office.
Then we have Mr. Rosenberg.
Dan Rosenfelder, property owner.
Okay.
Ken Nguyen with the Vietnamese Marble Paris, we just bought the property down in Kailaos, France.
Laura Tucker, CLR Stuyvesant.
Jamie Allen with Sigali Properties.
Larry Schramm with Macy's.
Ron Scarlett, property owner.
George Rockwell with the Andover Company with commercial real estate department.
I'm John Potter, I'm the video crew.
Okay.
Mary Reston, I'm the property manager for Andover West.
Robin Fishmont, the city engineer.
Gail Webinar, Public Works Analyst for the City of Tukwila.
Vicki Carlson, deputy finance director with city.
Did I miss anybody?
You did not?
And behind here?
They are video crew folks.
Okay, and we have video crew people here too, so, all right. Okay, so, anybody have any questions before we start? All right. So out of the gate, I will ask the city's representatives to begin with the presentation of what we have here today. And if you haven't already done it, I'm not going to say you have to do it now, but I see this nice color illustration, and now I have color here with me. If somebody at some point could highlight where the properties are that are subject to the appeals that we're speaking of today. You don't have to do that now, but by the end of the hearing, if I could, when I go home, if I could have something that shows me they're here, 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 here. And if you want to mark on that, that's great. You know, it's just use a outliner or something like that and show me. So, so I will turn it over to the city to make your narrative presentations as you choose, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Examiner. For the record, Bruce Deason, it's spelled D-I-S as in Sam, E-N-D, representing the... Doesn't sound like it. Oh, it's only for the camera. I will endeavor to speak louder. Thank you. Did you get the spelling of my last name? Okay. I'm appearing on behalf of the City Attorney's Office for the City of Tukwila. We are representing, of course, the city. The city will be presenting two witnesses, Mr. Examiner, Mr. Bob Giberson, who's the Director of Public Works for the city, who will give a brief overview of the project and set the landscape for our second witness, who's Robert McCauley, the city's expert appraiser, who will review the methodology and process of appraisal that was used to determine the individual assessments here. The city also has 4 exhibits. They're the standard exhibits you might expect, the resolution of formation of the LID. We do have a map of all the properties that are subject. It may be in your appraisal, but we thought we'd give you an additional one if necessary. And then there is a written report from Mr. Giberson. He will present a summary of that report to you during his testimony. And then, of course, we have Mr. McCauley's appraisal report, which will be introduced as well. Do you have any questions, sir?
No, Mr. McCauley's report, the appraisal made the remarks in the writing that there are several pieces, the writing being one and then a presentation being the other part. I presume that presentation will occur today.
Correct.
Yeah, and if you're asking, would you like me to have that waived? I would not. I very much would like to have a presentation
No,
made.
I was not requested. And I've never had that happen in a LID proceeding, but, okay. As I indicated, Mr. Giberson, our Public Works Director, will be our first witness, and do you wish the witness to be sworn?
Yes, I do. Okay. And at this time, if I would ask both of the city witnesses, please raise your right hand. Do you gentlemen swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. You both are under oath. Thank you.
Mr. Giberson, since we are creating a record, let me ask you what your position is with the city of Tukwila.
Public Works Director.
And in your capacity as Public Works Director, were you involved in the establishment of the LID that we are discussing today?
Yes.
Could you describe just in summary fashion what your role was?
In summary, I provided oversight of the design, the construction, and the formation of the LID.
Mr. Giberson, you're going to need to speak a lot louder. I think the people in the back of the room, I'm not very far from you, and they're going to have a hard time hearing you.
And Mr. Giberson, did you prepare a staff report to be entered into evidence today?
Yes.
And I will show you this document that's labeled Tukwila Urban Center Access Klickitat Project, Local Improvement District Number 33, staff report dated March 15th, 2013. And is that your report, sir?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Examiner, city would like to enter Mr. Giberson's report into evidence if there's no objection.
Any objection?
Yes. I've not seen it.
Oh.
Ms. Ballant has asked a question.
Sure.
She'd like to see the exhibit.
We have a couple extra copies if anyone else wishes to take a look about it. Mr. Giberson's about to testify regarding the contents of his report.
Step forward if you'd like a copy. Don't be shy. This is your hearing. If you feel you need something to prepare, you need to get it.
Sorry.
Ms. Ballant?
The copies only have the even numbered pages.
Oh. Yeah.
There's a copy machine right over there. Just white out Bob.
You're so picky.
Sorry, I know, I'm a pain.
Microphone is working, so if you could turn it towards yourself. when you
Doing your
speak,
job
it
would
might
not be
help
being
better.
a pain. No. That's fine.
Do we have copies?
We're going to make copies right
Someone
now.
is making copies, so if we want to,
Thank you.
if you want to move to the next point, but I will admit the complete item as, you want to label that as Exhibit 1?
Okay.
Was there a copy up here? Yeah, when you get a complete copy, we'll admit that as Exhibit 1.
Okay. Mr. Giberson, for the benefit of the examiner as well as the folks who are in attendance, could you provide us with a summary of your staff report? And we'll do kind of hit the 50,000-foot level, and then if there are questions, we'll follow up.
And as you move the mic to yourself, thank you very much for doing that. I heard a ringtone, so if everyone would please take out your electronic devices, iPhones, iPads, Google devices, anything, and turn off all sound making. And if you have a device in the room that's on vibrate and it's next to a piece of metal or wood, turn that off too. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Giberson, you have the microphone.
For the record, I'm Bob Giberson, Giberson, Public Works Director for the City of Tukwila. As a high-level summary of our staff report, there's 8 sections in the staff report as the background for the special benefit proportion assessment study, also to be discussed. The 8 sections are project overview, project need, project purpose, project history, general LID information, final special benefit study, public notice, and staff recommendation. The project overview, the design for the Klickitat project was completed in 2010. We went out to bid. We selected Atkinson Construction had favorable bids. Construction was completed. Project need was based on.
Before you go forward, Bob, I suspect everyone knows what the project consists of, but for purposes of making the record, could you just describe the nature of the improvements?
In essence, we created a southbound grade separation of South Center Parkway underneath Klickitat Drive. What that did was provided additional green time at a signalized intersection that was close to capacity and close to reaching level of service F.
And before you go forward, for those who are not traffic engineers, when you say the phrase green time, what are you referring to?
Well, a traffic signal has red, yellow, and green. Green time is when you're passing through an intersection, and level of service F is gridlock, basically. Level service A is free run time. So the purpose of this project was to increase the level of service from F to at least C, and we actually achieved that, if not more, at Klickitat South Center Parkway, where the level of service is now A. So basically, this project provided for future capacity, future growth in the Tukwila Urban Center. The map in the study, in the staff report, and to my right, shows the properties in the local improvement district. All those properties are within the Tukwila Urban Center. They all have special benefit because of this project. There's room for future growth. So the purpose of the project was congestion relief, congestion management. So it's all about increased green time, increased level of service. That's the pure and simple benefit of this project.
Mr. Giberson, was safety at all a factor with regard to the planning of this project?
Safety improvements were included, including not only vehicular safety improvements, but pedestrian and bicycle. There is no bike lanes in this project, but occasionally bicycles do go through, as well as pedestrians. Before, there were no sidewalks within the project limits to speak of. Now there are quite substantial improvements for pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles.
Thank you.
So after the local improvement district was formed and the construction was completed, the initial local improvement district cost estimate for the LID was $10.5 million. Because of a good contractor, a good design, and good construction management, the project finished ahead of schedule and under budget. The local improvement district has been reduced from $10.5 million to $9.9 million. So all the property owners and the city benefit from this construction contract decrease.
Mr. Giberson, did I hear you say that one of your intersections went from an LOS F to an A?
Yes.
Which one was that?
Klickitat Drive South Center Parkway. And that was documented.
Could you point that out?
Klickitat Drive intersects with South Center Parkway approximately across from Sears, to the west of Sears. Basically, that intersection was at gridlock, and we were heading to a de facto moratorium on growth based on concurrency standards.
Wow.
So I can't emphasize enough the importance of this project for the entire region. Public notices were sent out at the formation of the LID to the entire urban center property ownership, as well as tenants. Back in 2009, we again sent notices of this hearing recently. And this staff report is basically a segue to the McCauley & Associates Special Benefit and Proportionate Assessment Study. And the staff recommendation is to approve this final assessment roll for local improvement district number 33.
Now, Mr. Giberson, I'm observing some hand signals, which is why I'm pausing. I didn't know whether they were directed at me or the cameraman. Mr. Giberson, you indicated that the total cost of the project, are the properties within the local improvement district being asked to fund 100% of the cost of these improvements?
In the staff report, it has a breakdown of all the expenses as well as the revenues. Out of the total project costs of $22.5 million, there was $14 million approximately of city and grant funds, which leaves the net cost for the local improvement district, including a guarantee fund and a contingency fund for the unknowns. So the bottom line,
The unknowns.
guarantee fund and a contingency fund for the unknowns. So that leaves a grand total of $9.9 million approximately for the LID.
Mr. Giberson, I believe a complete copy of your staff report has now been duplicated. I don't know whether the clerk has received a copy.
Yes, and I didn't want to interrupt testimony. We've received a complete copy of what we've entered as Exhibit Number 1, which is the March 15, 2013 staff report. And it comprises of it's comprised of 7 pages, front and back copies, and I think we've got them all.
Thank you.
And did any of the participants get copies that wanted one? Okay.
Mr. Giberson, for purposes of introducing our exhibits, I'm going to ask you to identify a resolution designated 1698 that was approved for creating this district. Do you recognize this as the creation resolution?
Yes.
I'm going to show you a map that's labeled LID number 33, Final Assessment Roll, revised October 8th, 2012. Ask whether this accurately sets forth the properties located within the LID.
Yes, it does.
And last but not least, I'm going to show you a copy of a final special benefit proportionate assessment study prepared by Mr. Robert McCauley with regard to the City of Tukwila Urban Center Access Klickitat project. Do you recognize Mr. McCauley's report?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Examiner, the city would like to introduce these items as exhibits with resolution number 1698 being designated Exhibit 2.
And the clerk's going to get copies of these, so.
I was going to
Yep.
hand them. The map of the LID properties designated as Exhibit 3, and Mr. McCauley's report designated as Exhibit number 4.
Any objection? Okay. Without objection, Exhibit 2, the resolution, Exhibit 3, the map, Exhibit 4, the McCauley report are admitted.
Mr. Giberson, does that conclude your summary of the staff report?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Mr. Examiner, the city will now call as a witness Mr. Robert McCauley. And as I indicated earlier, Mr. McCauley is the city's appraiser in this project.
And Mr. McCauley, I remind you, you remain under oath.
Thank you.
Mr. McCauley, please state your name.
Yeah, Robert McCauley with McCauley Associates Limited, 2927 Colby Avenue, Everett, Washington.
Thank you. And could you tell us what your profession is?
I'm a real estate appraiser.
And without going into too much detail, could you summarize your experience in the appraisal field?
I've been in the profession approximately 25 years. I have the MAI designation. I'm also a state certified appraiser. I've been on a number of boards over the years. Regarding special benefit studies, 20 plus years of doing numerous special benefit studies for cities, counties, and utility districts throughout the state. I've done well over 100 studies over that term.
Mr. McCauley, we've introduced as exhibit number 4 the report that you prepared on behalf of the city. Does that document include a summary of your background and qualifications?
Yes, it does.
The examiner has been gracious enough to allow us to use a narrative form of testimony. So I am going to ask you to start at the beginning in terms of being assigned this task by the city, and then ask you to go through the steps that you took on behalf to prepare the report that's been identified as Exhibit 4.
Sure. I'll just give a brief outline of what we did, and if you need elaboration, I'll be happy to do so. The scope of our services was to prepare a special benefit proportion assessment study for the 270 parcels within the LID boundary area. And a special benefit is the difference in market value without, as opposed to with, the LID completed as of the same date and time. So each property is analyzed based on its highest and best use, which considers zoning, location, physical, and economic characteristics both before and after the LID improvements. In this LID, the total special benefit was approximately $50.85 million versus an LID assessment amount of approximately $9.9 million. Therefore, the cost-benefit ratio, if you divide the LID assessment amount into the benefit amount, is approximately 19%, which is very, very favorable. Most LIDs are 50 to 75% cost-benefit ratios or even higher. Also, the total project cost was substantially less than what the LID is funding. So to provide proportionate assessments, this ratio, the 19% ratio, is multiplied by each individual property's market value difference, each individual property's special benefit. That way, each property owner's assessment is proportionately distributed throughout the LID boundary area. So those properties having greater location change, greater difference in value, receive a higher special benefit and therefore a higher assessment versus properties that are less impacted by the LID improvements. So for example, the South Center Mall area received the greatest special benefit due to their location and infrastructure improvements relative to properties further south and further away from the LID. Also, there were zoning changes that were affected by the LID that allow for more multifamily, higher density development as a result of the project. So the area along Strander to the north received the most benefit, and as you move south along South Center Parkway and further east, the special benefits diminished and therefore the assessment amounts were less. So in summary, that's essentially the scope and the services of what we did. We look at comparable sales, rental rates, capitalization rates, factors, market factors that influence market value both before and after the LID improvements.
Could I ask, while you're on the topic, you mentioned the cost-benefit ratio was very favorable as compared to other projects.
Correct.
To what do you attribute, why? How is this project so much more beneficial in a cost-benefit analysis than the average run-of-the-mill project?
Well, I think one reason is the LID, the amount the LID is funding is significantly less than what the total project cost is. The LID could fund 100% of that cost if the city so choose to. So the percentage that the LID is paying towards the total project cost is significantly less than a lot of projects that we get involved in. The only other thing would be too that the comprehensive plan changes that are proposed are assisted by this project. So there's zoning and intensity of use changes that also impact market value, which create greater differences in market value or special benefits. Those are the two main factors.
Mr. McCauley, is the approach that you used in this project consistent with the approach that you've used in the past and in accordance with standard appraisal practice?
Yes, it is.
That's going to conclude the city's witnesses at this point. I'm assuming that there will be a substantial number of questions. We will deal with individual properties as they come forward with their objections.
It's a very quick presentation. Okay. So now is the time that I indicated that all the property owners would have an opportunity to ask their questions. So if somebody's I was going to go down the order, but I think it's probably better if you're ready. Somebody's raised their hand. And Ms. Ballant, you've indicated you'd like to ask some questions. So on behalf of the Sigali Properties, step forward, and I would ask that you go ahead and cover all of your questions pertaining to the properties that you represent. And when she concludes, I will ask for one of the next property owners if you're ready. So be taking your notes and be prepared. And okay.
For the record, my name is Jamie Ballant. I represent Sigali Properties, LLC, located at 5811 Sigali Park Drive C. That's in Tukwila, Washington. My first question is for Mr. Giberson. Mr. Giberson, during your testimony, you stated that the project resulted in an improvement to the level of service standard at the Klickitat Drive South Center Parkway intersection. And I believe you stated that the improvement was from an LOS F to A. And I'm just wondering if you can clarify the original LOS prior to the project, what that level of service was. The reason I'm asking is because on page 4 of the special benefits study, it stated that the pre-project LOS at that Klickitat South Center Parkway intersection was actually a level of service C.
Is it Charlie?
Yeah, C is in Charlie. So can you just clarify that?
For the record, Bob Giberson, Public Works Director. Yes, on page 4 it says LOSC for that intersection and level of service F at the I-5 off-ramp button hook, so I stand corrected. In addition, at the very end of the Macaulay Special Benefit Study is a memorandum from Fair and Peers with before and after comparison of level of service and capacity. And that's the full story of the benefit of this project.
Okay. Can you also tell me then, the pre-project level of service, was there a difference in the pre-project level of service during the midweek PM peak hour versus the weekend? I don't know if you'd call it peak hour, whatever the weekend peak hour is. I don't typically deal with weekend hours, but was there a difference there?
I'm not finding that in the Fair and Peers report, but there definitely was an improvement in level of service. In the Fair and Peers report I'm referring to on page 154, the level of service was D with 36.1 seconds of delay, and then we improved it to level of service C with 25.5 seconds of delay, and that's referring to the intersection of South Center Parkway and Klickitat Drive.
Okay, and that's the midweek PM peak?
That's midweek PM
Okay.
peak hour. That's the design
Okay.
PM peak hour.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay, my next question is for Mr. McCauley. And Mr. McCauley, you stated that there were zoning changes that resulted from the project. Can you tell me what those zoning changes were?
Well,
With respect to the Sigali Properties?
With respect to the Sigali Properties, yes, thank you.
With respect to the Sigali property, we assumed that the comprehensive plan, the Tukwila Valley South zoning that the Sigali property now has would not have been achieved without the LID improvements. So those were specific assumptions that were pertaining to the Sigali properties.
Okay, can you elaborate on the basis of that assumption?
Conversations with the city, Public Works, planning, the project engineer.
Okay. Okay, that's all.
Could you repeat that point? Your response to her question?
Regarding,
The zoning, the Sagala, you had an assumption?
it was assumed that the Sigali property is now zoned Tukwila Valley South, which allows approximately 10 million square feet of mixed-use development. When we did the formation study, the project had a variety of other more industrial, multifamily zoning designations. So the zoning changes that we assumed resulting from the road interchange project allows for significantly more development of that property than would have otherwise occurred without the LID improvements.
Actually, thank you. I do have a follow-up question. Do you know when the Sigali properties, the zoning change occurred? Do you know the date?
I don't know specifically, but it was, I believe it was after, or excuse me, before the formation study was completed.
Okay, thank you.
Just for purposes of clarification, the types of issues being raised by Ms. Ballant are those that are going to be investigated pursuant to the parties' agreement to defer moving forward on their objection today.
Okay. All right. Anything further?
That's all.
And you reserve based on your representation earlier this morning in Mr. Deason's stipulation, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you.
So the next property owner representative that's prepared, raise your hand. Anybody? And this is for your opportunity to ask questions of the city representative. Mr. Schramm? These are questions. Yeah, this is question time. Mr. Rosenfeld?
If you're requesting an adjustment of your assessment, you ask now or later in this hearing.
If you want to ask questions of the city's representatives, this is when you ask questions. If you heard them speak to something, or you know that in the report there's something in here that pertains to your property that you take exception to, and you want to ask a question like, why did you do this? What were you thinking? This is your chance to ask them questions. You will have a separate chance to make your presentation, which might be different, which might be telling me that you're an expert and you've done your appraisal, or you hired somebody and they say it's worth X before and after, and you think it's worth X before and after. That's during your presentation, but this is your chance to ask questions. If you think one of them has made a mistake or something in the report's wrong and you want to ask them questions how they got to it, now's a good time to ask those questions, okay? So question time, anybody ready to go with their questions? All right, step forward. Is it Mr. Schramm? Okay, on behalf of Macy's, step forward to the microphone. Okay. And speak right there. We appreciate your courtesy talking on your way up, but
No problem.
get yourself organized, take your time.
Yeah, again, my name is Larry Schramm. I'm with Macy's. My question is from Mr. Giberson on the timing. You mentioned something about the timing right
Can y'all
outside.
hear Mr. Schramm in the back?
Not very well.
If you could
Right
speak
out,
up.
right outside. I don't know if this is for that or this is for the upstairs. But the study was done, and it has to do with the timing again. You mentioned something about midweek. Was there a time of year that was also done? In other words, there's peak times during a seasonal year, of course, Christmas being one of them, when those studies were done. Was it consistent in terms of when the first study was done as opposed to when the second study was done?
Again, at the back of the special benefits study, there's a report by Fair and Pierce, and they were involved with traffic modeling and traffic engineering during design and throughout. So they used the same typical midweek PM peak hour as a reference point before, during, and after construction. So it's that period of time, and that does not include Thanksgiving to Christmas, which is a special peak, not your typical PM peak hour.
Okay, so it would be what would be a typical peak period,
Midweek
and not
PM
a
peak.
not a seasonal type of period of time.
Correct.
Okay. And while I'm also here, I guess I have a question for Mr. McCauley. In terms of the zoning, were you and the highest and best use of the type of property? Was there considerations of certain properties given to something that may not fit typically what the zoning is around them? Or I know this was done on a mass appraisal type of basis, but was there any consideration given on certain individual properties that may not fit that type of mold?
I guess I'm not following. Could Could you give me an example of what you're referring to?
Well,
or-
my example would be simply the Macy's warehouse. It's on South Center Drive, right in the middle of retail, and not typically where the industrial type of properties are. Having been a mass appraisal situation, were you able to give certain specific consideration to properties that might be in a zoned area that's not typical for that property?
Well, yes, in particular to the Macy's distribution property there, we look at land value in relation to net operating income, whether the improvements contribute any value over and above land value, things of that nature. So the existing use is taken into consideration, but also the highest and best use. So more so we look at underlying land value and underlying land value change.
Okay,
Did that answer your question?
that's my question.
You can follow up. It's your chance.
Oh, I know. Well, would adjustments be made from that highest and best use type of situation if the current use is not considered? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we consider the current use, but the market is going to buy the property based on its highest and best use, which may be different from a distribution center. So the underlying land value would reflect that difference in value relative to the best use of the property.
Okay.
And that's what we considered.
Okay. That's all for now.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is another property owner ready with their questions? I saw, is it Topfer? Topfers, please step forward on behalf of the Archdiocese.
Just a little history regarding, this is a recent purchase for the Archdiocese of Seattle. So much so that we did not have the benefit
Okay,
of...
Ms. Tepford, this is a chance to ask questions, and if you're going to testify on these
Oh, I'm
questions
sorry.
under oath,
Was that
you're not
considered
under
a... Okay.
But you're allowed to ask leading questions.
Okay.
But if you're trying to say something and you want it in the record and you want me to accept it as evidence, and this is for everybody.
Oh, okay.
That's when your presentation happens, unless you need me to place you under oath when you're up here asking questions. But I prefer these be questions, okay?
Okay.
So, okay.
I did not have the benefit of the report. Is that okay to say that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's all I wanted to preface. Because it's a recent purchase, I don't have the report. So my question is, do you have the appraised value for our property at 6801 South 180th Street?
Do you know which map number you are by chance? The city said it's 242, but the...
I do not. We have only one notice regarding this whole LID. That is the only information I have.
Ms. Tepford, you want to step up on the map and show where your property is located?
Yep, that's it.
All right, so for the record, could we indicate where that is? That's the,
On the map, it's parcel number 242, the south end is Ferry Drive, south of Home Depot, south of Costa.
That's correct.
and it's bounded by where the river makes a bow?
Yep.
Or a
River
curve?
south of 180.
Okay.
That's correct.
Formerly Carlisle property.
Formerly Carlisle, that's correct.
So on that property, we had a special benefit estimate of 62,000 and a recommended assessment amount of $12,042.
And can you explain to me the benefit value of 62?
We're looking at the value immediately before and immediately after the improvements and any relative location change, essentially to the underlying land value. Is it reasonably probable that the underlying land value would go up slightly as a result of the LID improvements versus without them, particularly looking at zoning changes and typical market conditions?
Okay. So the appraisals then looked at the increase in value, not the overall value of each property?
We did look at,
You need to speak up a little bit, ma'am.
Very difficult.
Yes. I asked if the appraisals only allowed for the increase in value rather than the overall value of the property.
well, the difference in value, the special benefit is the difference in value of the
Right.
property before and
Okay.
after.
So that is the
Correct.
figure.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, that's all my questions.
thanks.
Is that all the questions you have?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Scarbo?
May I ask it from here? Would it be
No,
just-
please don't.
My question's for Mr. McCauley.
And please don't speak until you get to the microphone.
I don't think the microphones are working from where I sit.
Well, they
so-
are for purposes of making
All
a
right.
tape, I think, yeah.
Understand. Hi, Mr. McCauley. I'm Ron Scarbo,
Hi, Ron.
property owner. I understand that the rate of assessment is based on proximity to this improvement. Can you tell me what percentage of the total traffic to this area comes through that improved intersection?
No, I mean, I'm not a traffic engineer. I mean, we look at traffic studies and relative location, but I couldn't answer a question like that.
I'm just curious because our proximity we're very close to this. And so I'm assuming that the rate that I'm being assessed is higher than a similar property that's a mile away down the parkway.
Typically, yes.
And I assume then that rate is somehow calculated based on the assumed traffic flow from other areas rather than just the improvement. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, it's your relative location change, looking at zoning changes that resulted from the improvements as well.
How do you then calculate that if you don't know what percentage of the total traffic comes through the improvement versus all the other areas?
Mr. Examiner, good questions. I think, Mr. Scarbo, to try and assist you, they might be better directed to Mr. Giberson, the engineer, rather than our appraiser. So I'll leave that choice to you.
Yeah, that's fine, Mr. Giberson.
Okay. So same question. Mr.
Yes,
Giberson?
yeah, I'm just curious as to
So
how
again, in the back of the special benefit report is a Fair and Peers analysis of traffic before and after. Basically, the South Center area, or the Tukwila Urban Center, has almost 200,000 vehicles per day passing in and out of 9 access points, in and out points. So what this project did was lessen the congestion and delays at the other 8 points, because we improved one of those 9 points.
Mm-hmm.
And a second point, and added a traffic signal at McDonald's Doubletree. So what that did was improve traffic at those other intersections throughout the urban center. So that's not a percentage, but the further away you get from this project, the less benefit. But since there's only 9 ways in and out of the South Center area, or urban center, the whole area is benefited. So as you move away, the benefit is less, and you'll see that in the special benefit as it decreases.
Mr. Giberson, since you mentioned it, could you point to this map and show me where, I know where this project is, but go ahead and show us, and then show where the other 9 are.
So the 9 access points to the urban center are the I-5 off-ramps within this project limit, Clickitat Drive, South Center Parkway, 61st across 405, 68th across 405, Strander Boulevard across the river, 180th across the river, South Center Parkway from Tukwila South north, 178th down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
That's the 9 access points to this island known as the South Center area or Tukwila Urban Center. So this improvement improved all those access points. And the improvements are greatest next to the project, but they benefit all the access points. And that's shown in the traffic study.
On traffic counts.
Traffic counts, traffic modeling. We have a traffic model that's updated every year or two, and that's used for our concurrency and traffic impact fees as well as future projects. So it is documented in this report as well.
Mm-hmm. During the time of construction, which was between 6 and 7 months, I believe, do you then assume that the loss of traffic to those of us closest to the project was greater than the loss of traffic to those away from the project, at some distance away?
Well, the road closure definitely had an impact on traffic as we detoured traffic around the east side of the mall, and the project is on the west side of the mall. Those impacts were necessary to get the project done of this magnitude in 7 to 8 months. $22 million total project cost done in construction beginning to end March with traffic back open by Thanksgiving shopping season is unheard of. If we had not closed that road, the impacts would have been stretched out over 2-3 years. So, not really answering your question, but the before and after project condition are what's being measured, not during construction.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Scarbo, did you get a copy of is it Fair and Peers? That's the traffic study, right?
Again, that's the last pages before the spreadsheet.
Did you ask for that? Have you?
No, I
ever
didn't.
looked at it?
No.
Is there a spare copy that he could sit and?
Yes.
Take a look?
Mhm.
He's made reference to a traffic study Mr. Giberson did.
So it's on the traffic study I'm referencing is on page 154 through page 156.
Mr. Scarborough, if you want to thumb through that, and if you have another question based on something you see there, raise your hand. And
Thanks.
okay.
I appreciate it very much.
All right. Next property owner who might have a question, who's filed an appeal. Okay. Sir, you don't represent an appellant, correct?
I don't. I owned a piece of property that I sold, so I still am involved in this LID. It's that Whitewater property, but I just had a general question.
Hold on a second. You a Widewater Group?
Yes.
So you sold that, right?
Yes. I own that property and sold that to them.
Has the deal closed?
Yes. We're still involved in the LID process, but I just had a very general.
And let me ask a question, Mr. Deason. Sorry. I would like to know, would the city object to Mr. Lawless? Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Rockwell posing any questions? But he sold a property that is an appellant and the deal has closed. And my concern is that this is an appeal for actual appellants, not individuals who haven't appealed or otherwise.
Yes, the city would have an objection. However, the city wants to make sure that all members of the public and the property owners that might be affected have an opportunity to discuss their questions, and staff would make themselves available to do so. But I think the nature of the questions here are outside the scope of this proceeding.
And Mr. Rockwell, and anybody else who is not an appellant who had a question, when we take a break, feel free to step forward. As Mr. Deason has said, you may have a question of the engineer or the appraiser that they can answer, but this is a formal record. It is a public record being made, and under the rules for this proceeding, the only participants under the law that should be participating are those that actually filed a written appeal. So respectfully, I cannot allow your question to go forward, and I won't allow it. But on a break, feel free to step forward and ask questions, and hopefully through some document or something you can get your question answered, okay? All right. Other property owners who are actual appellants, do you have any questions? Mr. Rosenfeld, you look like you might, or you don't?
I'll wait and do one.
You just a presentation, you don't want to ask any questions? Okay. Anybody else? Seeing no questions. Now's probably a good time to take maybe a 5-minute break or something for people to stretch their legs or whatever. And when we're done with the break, when we come back, I see it's 10:07. We use that clock. We'll go back on the record at 10:15 on that clock, which you probably can't see. I don't know. But did you have a question before we go off the record?
Just one question that may be of assistance and perhaps appropriate just prior to the break, Mr. Examiner, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Mr. Giberson. We gave a rather summary presentation earlier on, and it's apparent to me that some folks may not be that familiar with the LID process. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Giberson a question that may ease some concerns, I hope. If not, at least it'll be additional information for you. But Mr. Giberson, the folks whose property is being assessed, do they have to pay their assessment in a lump sum?
In fact, they could pay it off over 15 years, and that billing process will be set up with our finance department.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay. All right. So we will take our break until 10:15, after which I will ask the property owners, representatives, or whatever to come forward one at a time and make your presentation. Mr. Rockwell, anybody's got questions, catch them on the break. We're off the record.
Would you like a granola bar? My associate brought some.
Oh, you're sweet. We have reached the point now where I had indicated that the property owners or their representatives will be given an opportunity to make your presentations as you see fit, to explain why the assessment that has been attributed to your property is a mistake, is wrong, should be modified, and for you to tell me why and what sort of evidence, proof, or bases you're making that remark. There is also come up, or at least it's in my head, a little thought bubble happened, that some of you, as Mr. Deason said, may not be familiar with what LIDs are. If there are questions you have or things that, wow, I didn't know about this, let us know. And if I have the record, or if the document's already here as an exhibit, as I did with Mr. Scarbo, I'm happy to share a copy of the exhibit here. Mr. Deason may have extra copies, so you all can look at things, and if you need to take it away and read it for a little while to think if you've got more questions or things like that, let me know, okay? This is an opportunity for you to be heard, but you also need to be prepared. And I presume many of you have spent a lot of hours preparing for this, and some of you may not be familiar with this process. So let me know that too, and we'll try to accommodate that if we can. Okay? So I was inclined to go down the list that I have here, unless you all have some other needs. If some of you have special needs or whatever, you were supposed to let me know, and I didn't hear that. So I'm just going to go down the list, and we'll go in that process. So as you make your presentation, at the conclusion of that presentation, it may be more efficient to then let the city representatives ask you questions if they have any, based on anything that you've said. So you'll get up, and then just like you got a chance to ask them questions, they'll have a chance to ask you questions or to answer statements that you made, to say, Mrs. Jones was worried about blah, 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 but that's on page 6. It's right here. So we'll give them a chance to do that, and you can follow up. I'm not imposing time limits on anybody. Nobody indicated to me they needed an exhaustive amount of time. So take your time. And remember, this is your moment in the sunshine of use it wisely at your own discretion, how you choose to do that, okay? So first, we have Mr. Schramm on behalf of the Macy Collections of Properties. And if you would, for the record, Mr. Schramm, step forward here and let us know where those 4 properties are. There's a map here, and let's see. And previously I'd asked, and I'd just like to note for the record, that could the public works staff, your computer-generated people or generating people that do graphics, would it be possible that if they took what is Exhibit 3 and they somehow put shaded different color based on an appellant, and there are a list of the parcels that are represented here, so I know which properties are at issue in the appeal. And you don't have to do that today, but at some point give it to the clerk, and it would be entered as Exhibit 3A as an apple. Okay? And copies of that for anybody will be available at the city clerk's office. How much time do you think you all need to generate that?
A week,
Okay.
just because of work.
So within a week, if anybody would like to see that, all I'm asking, it's just to make it easier for me and the city council to see, where are your properties? Because right now we have this map, and it would be easier for us just to have something, because not everybody's appealing, and those that are, it'd be nice to pinpoint. I can find them. So, and that would be 3A. What's that?
Exhibit 5 has just come in from Mr.
Oh,
Schramm.
great. All right. And Mr. Schramm, you have brought forward an exhibit or a document that you'd like me to consider, and the clerk has marked that as Exhibit 5. And did you provide a copy to the city? I believe you did. Okay. Any objection, Mr. Deason?
No.
All right. Without objection, Exhibit 5 is admitted. Mr. Schramm, it's your opportunity to make a presentation. Do you need the computer or anything?
No. You want me to point the parcels out?
You can. That'd be great.
Yeah, my name is
You know what? I do need to swear you in. Yeah. Would you, sir, please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schramm?
Yes, again, my name is Larry Schramm. I'm a Director of Property Tax with Macy's Corporation. We've appealed 4 parcels today, 2 of which I'm going to speak about. The other 2 happen to be the mall property, which is up here at the South Center Mall. It's the Macy's store. Hopefully,
So the Macy's or Federated actually owns the footprint where the structure that is the Macy's department store stands.
yes.
And I take it Westfield owns the rest of it or most of it?
Actually, we own the land in the building.
Where Macy's is?
Where Macy's is.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Not owned by the mall, the building's owned by Macy's. Okay.
and that's up at the South Center
Mhm.
Mall.
And just for the record, if it matters, so anybody wants to object, I have a Macy's credit card. I've shopped at that store. I'm familiar with South Center Mall. I probably shopped at all of your stores at some point. Yeah.
I'm pointing to it here.
And I can be fair in making my decisions, and I'm not late making payments or anything.
And there is a furniture store down here, and there's another, so, we're not considering those. But what you may not be aware of is a warehouse that's along South Center. The address is 170000. It's 170,000. Not sure how that's said in Seattle, but that's South Center Parkway, and it's the two parcels right there.
And that's your distribution warehouse?
That's the distribution warehouse, yes. The store, we've considered, what initially we were concerned, we looked at it, we were very concerned about the overall value that was placed on that. And as we researched and got into this project, we realized that for this purpose, the land is the value that is really being considered, or the benefit is being considered as far as the land goes. But we, just for the record, we object to the overall value of the Macy's store because there was quite an improvement put on that property in the study, which we felt we disagreed with. Well, we do disagree with. And as far as for our purposes and the special benefit, I'd like to really concentrate mostly on the distribution center. That is at, as I pointed out, on
You're
South
not
Center.
withdrawing your appeal on the others? No.
No, we're not withdrawing it. I'm just not going to speak to that today.
As much, okay.
Yes, yeah, as much. But if you would draw your attention to the warehouse parcels, which is parcel 262304-9077 and parcel 262304-9076. What we've done, we researched a bit, and we've determined pretty much what the definition in the report was. The cost of the lid improvements are allocated over the tax parcels based on the increase in market value of the parcel as a result of these improvements. This increase is called special benefit, and the study's definition is a specific measurable increase in the value of certain real property in excess of enhancement to the general area and benefiting the public at large due to the public improvement project. The market value of the land before and after the lid improvements is measured by an assessment study or appraisal. The assessments that allocate the cost of the lid is supported by really the state legislature. They've determined this is the process on how a lid should progress and how it should be reported. And I'd like to point out two criteria that is within that, and it's also in the report as well. The first criteria is the amount of an assessment on a particular parcel may not materially exceed the special benefit to that parcel, and all assessments within the district must be fair in rough proportion to all other assessments. And I bring that up, I mentioned a bit earlier in terms of the warehouse that I'm speaking of.
You're using the term warehouse and distribution to mean one and the same?
I'm sorry, yes.
That's okay.
Yeah, the
I do
distribution
it too,
center,
but
warehouse.
I just want to make sure we're talking the same sites.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I actually had in here Macy's store warehouse before, and I thought, well, that's just kind of
And it's
crazy.
what
'cause
used
that's
to be
gonna
your clearance center, right? Part of it.
Yes, I think part of it used to be that, yes. But the property is, as it was really termed to me, and it's, I think, appropriate, is a kind of a fish out of water in terms of where it's located. It's on South Center Drive or Parkway, and it's a warehouse amongst office and mostly retail type properties. In addition, the warehouse was built in 1968, and it's loaded with obsolescence. It's not the kind of warehouse distribution center that would be built in today's or by today's standards. And it's really lacking the overall land for a warehouse to be effective. So, ceiling heights about the property, and this goes into the building portion, I know, and it's not necessarily directed toward the land, but I think overall it's important to understand what this property, this piece of real estate and its improvements is all about. The flow of product, low land to building ratio, as I mentioned, are sources of this obsolescence. What I've prepared here is a list. If you'll look at the spreadsheet, what I did was I looked at the zoning, and I deciphered that there's the TUC P and the TUC W. Probably means the TUC P is the pond, which is an area on this that is surrounding the pond that is just north of the warehouse, and then warehouse type properties. Well, if you look at the TUC P, all the properties that are around us, there's a hotel, a retail, strip shopping center, hotel, there's the pond, another strip center, an office, and then vacant classified commercial property. That's within this. It's also classified as industrial by the county assessor's office. So if you look at the properties that are just, if I will, when I started to do this, I noticed that properties that were on Andover Parkway, kind of in this area over here, just really adjacent to the properties, are our property, and a little bit southeast of the warehouse.
You're illustrating an area mostly to the east.
Mostly to the east along Andover, and then south of Boulevard. And those properties, and this is just a sample of properties listed, industrial light, and then warehouse all the way down, which we believe to be more relevant and considered more typical of what our property is. I think by being put into the category of retail along South Center, or this TUC P, we've been classified, or misclassified, I should say, and in doing so, that assessment value or market value before the lid is already too high, and then of course when the benefit of that, or the special benefit, is added, that value afterward, or the market value afterward, is again too high.
Are you asking, has Macy's been rezoned?
We have
Or
not
the
been
distribution
rezoned as
site?
I know it. It's I think just I think it's commercial zoning. I didn't look at I should look at the assessment records, which I have in my bag, but I know the zoning hasn't changed.
I guess my question is, are you noting that you would prefer that the distribution site, while it fronts South Center, is that South Center Parkway or Boulevard? What's the name of it?
South Center Parkway.
North-South Parkway.
Right.
Okay. You're saying that everything to the left and the right of it might be zoned a certain way, and you
Well, I'm
don't
not,
want yours to be
not
zoned that
necessarily
way?
even zoned, as it were. I'm talking about classified, maybe zoned in the report.
And the reason I'm asking the question is, I can't impact zoning.
No,
but
and
it's-
I know that.
But it's
Right.
relevant to me to know
Zoning
the
in the
basis for
context
your valuation theory.
Zoning in the context of the report and the allocation of the assessment.
Okay.
So what we believe that if you look again at the spreadsheet, our land value before the lid was considered $19 and $18 on each of the parcels. The $19, I think, is the one that's closest to South Center. There's the parcel that's landlocked in back. That's given, I guess, $1 off in value. And the land value after the lid is $21 and $20, or a $2 increase, or $2 special benefit to that property. It's our contention that the classification in the report should be considered more in terms of the warehouse type property as opposed to the retail. And when I say that, I mean that in terms of a benefit, the retail population, if you will, of the parcels would benefit from the increased improvements, ingress, egress type situations. That really hasn't done a whole lot for our the trucking, and I can tell you that it's not really improved our property in the sense that it might have improved, say, a hotel or the retail type properties that are along South Center Parkway. So my point is that the properties that are south and east that are classified warehouse should be considered comparable properties, and we should be classified in terms of those. And what I've done is we respectfully request that the land value before the lid be considered $15 per square foot for parcel 262-304-9077 and $14 for parcel 262-304-9076. And after the lid improvements, $16 and $15.50 respectively, which is $1 and $1.50 special benefit, which it is our belief that is more reflective of our property and in terms of special benefit and the purpose of the assessment that's before us. That's all. That's all. Thank you.
To the city's representatives, do you all have any questions of the Macy's representative?
We do, Mr. Examiner. And just from a procedural standpoint, as we go through the objections, would you like, following the presentations, for the city to provide any rebuttal that it might have, or should we hold that off on that until all the objections have been heard?
Organizationally, it might be better if you're ready to do it now.
Okay.
But for instance, if somebody has raised something and one of you needs to have finance or public works generate a document, let me know that.
Okay.
But if you can now, that's fine. And I did, and yes, there will be an opportunity for rebuttal because you may think of it later. But if you've got questions, now would be good. And if you have responses, and just to key in, zoning is going to be a question I have, and as well as, what's the use of the warehouse and what things are done there, and what does this interchange do to help it?
Okay. Hi, Mr. Schramm.
Hello.
Thank you for your testimony. If I understood your statements correctly, the principal objection you have is related to the use that's located on the land rather than the specific location. Is that fair to say? In other words, you have a warehouse. It sounds like you have an old warehouse. It may have some obsolete innards to it, and correct me if I'm wrong as I'm making my statement. And in your view, any valuation of your property should be based upon other warehouse properties rather than the retail that surrounds the warehouse distribution center. Is that fair to say?
Partially correct, yes.
In doing your calculation of the value per square foot, did you take into account what Mr. McCauley referred to earlier as the highest and best use of the property?
We did consider that, but we also considered, what the state has adhered to the two criteria, and that is that all assessments within the district must be fair and in rough proportion to all other assessments. So my take is on proportionality. If you're looking at, a warehouse here, it may not be necessarily the highest and best use. It may not be. I don't believe that we've addressed that study here necessarily. So, if it were not to be the highest and best use, then what you're saying is that it should be leveled and a hotel or retail should be put there. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, although I do believe it does have an underlying, a consideration. But for the allocation of this assessment, I believe that the fair and proportionate part of what the state has to say is more appropriate.
Now, as has been pointed out, your property is located on South Center Parkway.
Yes, sir.
I am intimately familiar with South Center Parkway. And would it be fair to say that probably over 90% of the businesses on South Center Parkway are retail in nature?
I am from Cincinnati, but I have seen the property and I've driven it a few times, and I've actually been here over years.
Okay.
But I would say, in my probably less than expert opinion, it's definitely more than, at least in that section of South Center Parkway. As you go further south, there's new
Correct.
new warehouse type properties.
Mhm.
But in that section,
It's principally retail,
Yes.
correct? Okay. If your company was to sell the property, would you seek to obtain the highest price reasonably possible for it?
I would assume we would. We don't own the property, but yes.
Okay. And based upon your earlier testimony, you see a distinction between the value for assessment purposes between retail uses and warehouse uses, correct?
Yes.
And if you were to sell the property, it could be used for a retail use, could it not?
Well, in its current state, the building, the improvements as well? Or are you talking about if we sold the property in its current state? I would think it would not be a retail establishment.
Mm-hmm. But are you aware of any limitations that would prevent it from being developed as a retail establishment?
I'm not aware of any, no.
I have no further questions for Mr. Schramm.
Mr. Schramm,
Yes, sir.
the distribution center, generally speaking, why does Macy's call that a distribution center? What does that place do for Federated and Macy's?
It services 35 to 40 department stores throughout the Pacific Northwest. The closest other distribution center is in the San Francisco area.
Wow.
It also services 9, I may be wrong, I know it's 9, it's not 10, it's somewhere below 9, furniture galleries. So it's as small as it seems there. I was somewhat shocked at how the importance and how how broad of an area it does service.
So the nearest department store Macy's has is obviously at South Center Mall.
Yes, sir.
Right. Does South Center Mall maintain?
I take it
I'm sorry?
there is a furniture gallery that's probably just a bit closer, but relatively speaking, yes, those two.
So generally speaking, do those two retail stores, the furniture store and the one at the mall, do they maintain a whole lot of inventory on their own, or do you use that distribution center to keep it, and then when they need it, you move it to the retail presence?
As far as I know, it goes to the warehouse first, and then it is directed from there.
Do you rent a lot of dead space at the mall for purposes of storage?
Not necessarily. That would, we would probably try to keep that at a minimum because that's not their purpose.
And Bellevue Square, where Macy's has several establishments, do you rent a lot of space there for purposes of storage and maintaining inventory? Or is the strategy of Macy's department store more to keep inventory at the distribution center and get it to the store when the store needs it?
It's more of a matter of timing to get the showroom, be the showroom and use as much space as possible for that, and minimum keeping the inventory at the store.
So how important is timing? Let's just pick the Bellevue and the downtown Seattle store, which I presume are your two busiest stores in the Northwest.
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yeah, from what I know, I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Well, let's just imagine it's like Cincinnati. Downtown Cincinnati is probably good, and you've got
Yes.
a suburban store that's
Yeah.
super good too.
Yes.
Okay. So timing's important on how fast the merchandise can get to that store.
Timing is important in any time to get to and from the product.
So do you believe that a faster intersection would benefit that scheme, that strategy, or why do you not see a benefit that flows from that?
In talking with the manager at the store, he said he's still has
The manager of the distribution center?
distribution center, and it may be easier there, and it may be more of a problem on the Macy's parcel per se, but they have to line up to get to the parcel still because of the limited space on our parcels for the trucks to be there. But I'm not saying there isn't a benefit. Clearly, there's been a benefit by this project. Having been here before, I can say that with certainty that I was here actually when it was the mall was expanding, and it was the holiday season, and it was, it has definitely improved. My thought is that to Macy's distribution center benefit, it hasn't benefited as much as what the assessment says. And I think I clearly said that there's a benefit there, and I even said that it's a certain special benefit at the end of it, but it's not the $2 special benefit that the assessment is saying.
Okay. Mr. Deason, do you have any, or your representatives have any follow-ups based on anything I asked?
I'm going to ask Mr. McCauley to respond to the testimony. I don't have any follow-up questions, though.
And because I'm glad you did, because Mr. McCauley, I'd like, if you could, either of you gentlemen, because anybody that shops Macy's understands the distribution center, and you may have waited at some point for something to arrive at a different store. Did you all in any way factor that into the equation of how that particular property would benefit or not? Or was it really solely based on highest and best use? In other words, if it's zoned skyscraper after the project and it's zoned farm before, I'm giving you very A to Z examples, but I'm just doing that so it's easy for people to understand. Was that the only thing you looked at, the zoning, or take a distribution center where it's really important that that couch gets to Bellevue quickly so they could sell it, or that men's shirts and ties are there at the store when people are ready for the men's sale in Bellevue, and if they're tied up at South Center, it's hard for them to get the merchandise sold in Bellevue. Did you look at that or not?
Generally, when we look at highest and best use, you're looking at the highest and best use as the land as vacant and then the land as improved. And when we looked at the land as improved, we looked at an interim use. With the zoning in place, this property will be rezoned to what's called the Pond District, and it'll allow a significantly greater development, including multifamily. So the redevelopment potential was considered, but we also, just looking at the market today, recognized that the existing improvements we felt had some interim value where the property, if purchased today, the market is going to recognize that significantly greater development potential and a higher land value, and then look at the improvements on an interim basis. For example, the property immediately south of that, the Wig property, sold in '05 for approximately $18 a foot, and then they tore down a large warehouse structure to develop the existing retail development that's there. So.
Is that the property with the new Nordstrom rack and
Correct.
things of that sort?
Correct. Yeah. The Kohl's and the Nordstrom rack. Yeah. Correct.
Panera Bread, that
Exactly.
rectangle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So something like that in the future is possible, but even with greater development potential and diversity, because now multifamily and mixed uses are allowed on that site that wouldn't have otherwise been allowed without the LID. So that's why we had a land value change like we did.
So answering my question and Mr. Schramm's point, you really didn't look at what it's used for now very much, did you?
We looked at it on an interim basis.
So in
but-
other words, you deem the use of the facility as a distribution center as in quotes an interim use, right?
Correct.
That won't be there forever.
Correct.
Did you attribute any benefit to that interim use caused by the project or not? Or was that no?
No.
We just look at highest and best use.
Correct. We look at the market and how the market would react to it, and that's our conclusions.
Mr. Giberson, did you have anything to add based on traffic and benefits to trucking
Going
and
back to
distribution?
Going back to the traffic study and the 9 egress access points to the urban center, same theories apply. The improvements at Klickitat Drive, South Center Parkway, and Strander intersections benefit the entire urban center. So, same improvements to level service and reduction in congestion apply here.
So do you have evidence to demonstrate whether Macy's or any other trucking or anybody who's waiting on a delivery, are their wait times down to either get things out or get things in?
Delay and wait times are down at all the key intersection points in the urban center. So whether it's a 18-wheeler or a 4-wheeler, there are benefits.
So if I used to have to schedule things for one time of day because that was the only time traffic was good, are you saying that it's different now?
It has significantly improved. Less delay, less congestion.
Now, Mr. Schramm, do you have any questions based on anything I've asked? Okay. Does the city have any other questions or remarks for Mr. Schramm?
I do. Mr. Schramm, as part of your presentation, you introduced a document labeled Comparable Properties in an LID Study. Do you have a copy of that in front of you? Are any of the properties that are identified on this sheet located on South Center Parkway?
And for the record, that's been marked and entered as Exhibit 5.
Thank you.
I'm not certain. I know that the Tukwila Center P is the area that we're in, and the surrounding properties around the pond area. And I think when I read the definition, it kind of goes to what Mr. McCauley mentioned in terms of the mixed use would be defined as that area being a possibility of residential and other types of properties. So I focused on that I'm not going to say zoning again because I'm not sure. I guess that gets confusing, but the classification or zoning of the P properties, whether that includes any of the properties on South Center Parkway, I'm not certain.
You indicated some concern about the assessment failing to take into account the current use and pointed out the current physical condition of your property. In looking at the properties in Exhibit 5 on the comparable list, are you familiar with the physical conditions of the warehouses identified on that sheet?
No, I wasn't there to appraise them necessarily. I was, simply looking at the study and determining what properties' use was similar to the use that we have.
But you did not do an individualized study of each of the properties to determine their physical condition?
No, I did not.
Do you know the approximate distance of each of these properties from your warehouse?
As I indicated a moment ago, it's that area that's the TUCP.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in the study here.
Okay.
So it's our property and surrounding properties around the pond.
Mm-hmm. But if I understand the criteria you used to compare your property to these other properties, essentially, my understanding of your testimony is that if it was a warehouse, it was comparable. You also have some other uses here that are not warehouse related.
Correct. And again, it's the use, and you had asked about, say the condition of the warehouse and so forth. I go back to what I began, and if I'm not mistaken, the value or the assessment that is here is really based on the land and not necessarily what the condition of the improvement might be.
And I understand that, but I thought you were trying to make the point that the appraiser should have taken into account the condition of the property, which is why you pointed out it's an older facility, it's somewhat obsolete.
Right.
And if using criteria that you've identified, I just want to make sure that this sheet is an apples to apples comparison. And if you don't have the same level of information with regard to the other properties as you do of your own, I don't think we can say it's truly an apples to apples
Well,
comparison.
I think it is an apples to apples in terms of the use of the land being industrial, and driving around and seeing many of the properties that are Long Andover and so forth. They are similar in terms of warehouse and the use of the land that's there.
Now, you've identified some of the criteria you believe that state law requires be taken into account when evaluating property in an LID. Do you have any particular expertise with local improvement districts or appraisal techniques or things of that nature?
Well, in terms of appraisal techniques and so forth, I've been doing this for property tax purposes for a number of years and gone through many classes, and I've got a property tax designation. So in terms of valuation, I'm not a state licensed or an MAI, but I do have a pretty familiar understanding of the concepts of appraisal. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, with regard to the state, it's just simply what I read in the report.
Sure. Okay. What does a property tax manager do? Or what are your responsibilities? You're testifying as the director of property tax.
Oh, yeah.
You were being, I'll just say my term, you were being modest. This is not an opportunity, well,
Yeah,
I would advise against you being modest.
No, that's fine.
I want to know your experience, your background.
Well-
You mentioned you're familiar with property valuation.
Yes.
Why? How come? What did you do?
Well,
What is your education?
Well, I've been in the property tax field for over 25 years.
You need to speak up a little bit.
Over 25 years. I've worked in the Cook County Assessor's Office in Chicago. I've worked as a consultant. I've worked with corporations, so I've had all surrounding type of experience in terms of valuing, and actually when you consider mass appraisal value, I've had that experience. Pardon me? Well, there were 7 years at the assessor's office, and the rest of the 25 plus years, about 28 years now, outside of the county type work, where we would value, and to get back to your question, with property tax, we go from personal property on those states that have personal property taxation, real estate taxation on virtually all the other ones that all 50 states have some sort of property tax. So we would look at value from the standpoint of how the assessor has valued the property, and then challenge those assessments that we feel that we may not be paying our fair share.
That's exactly the point I was heading towards, and you helped me. Based upon your years of experience, what's the relationship between assessed value and market value?
Well, it depends on the state you're in.
In the state of Washington?
In the state of Washington, assessed value should be 100% of market value.
Do you know whether that's true or not?
It depends. I haven't looked at the state studies recently to see if their ratios are what the ratios are, but we are, they should be 100% of market value.
Interesting. So in doing your calculation, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in your view or in your analysis that the assessed value had a direct correlation to market value?
In my analysis?
Yes.
Not necessarily. I was really relying on the expertise of the appraisal in terms of the classification. And in other words, when I came up with my per square foot, values on the properties, my reaction was, well, we're a warehouse here. We're surrounded by some warehouses to the east of us. Should we not be, say, $15 per square foot of land value as opposed to the $19 that we have on there? That's more of the assessment that are giving to the retail properties. And when we talk about benefit and special benefits, should that not have been, a consideration on our property, that difference?
Is it fair to say the data that you relied upon came from the appraisal report as opposed to you doing an independent analysis?
Yes. I mean, I obviously would have a problem with the appraisal of our anchor department store if we were looking at the overall value, because not the forum for it, but those values are considerably out of line from an improvement standpoint, especially. But I did not do any additional study on my own. I was looking more in terms of the fairness, and quite honestly, if I be honest, the timing of this was such that it didn't allow me to go get an appraisal, or didn't really let me go out and to really investigate the market. So due to time constraints, I looked for, well, let's see if it's fair.
Sure. Okay. I have no further questions for Mr. Schramm.
How quickly could you get an appraisal ordered and done?
It just depends on, for a distribution center, we'd have to certainly look in the market, see who's out available. It would probably be a few months. I'm just giving that my guess based on my experience.
Do you have anything further?
I do not.
Mr. Deason?
I'd like to ask Mr. McCauley a couple of questions in response to the testimony of Mr.
Certainly.
Schramm.
And to the other property owners, it's just better organized. We deal with your parcels, your questions, your issues when you're up. So, okay? Mr. McCauley?
Mr. McCauley, did you hear the testimony that Mr. Schramm just offered?
Yes, I did.
And he indicated his own perhaps unique approach to setting the valuation for the Macy's properties. Was the approach that he used in any way consistent with the approach that you use as an expert appraiser?
Well, again, we look at the market value before and after under the highest and best use, zoning, physical characteristics under each scenario. So it didn't appear that the valuation was done under that premise.
Did you hear any evidence in Mr. Schramm's statements concerning before and after value?
No.
Mr. Schramm indicated that in his view that the actual use of the property combined with the nature of the improvements on the property should be factors that go into setting the assessment determination. Is that consistent with your view as an appraiser?
My job is to reflect the market and how the market would look at that property. And the market would look at that property more on a interim use for redevelopment to a mixed-use commercial type development.
Mr. Schramm probably appropriately indicated that fairness was really the heart of the issue here, and in fact that there are some warehouse uses east of this particular property, although this particular property is located on South Center Parkway. To what extent, if any, are those appropriate factors to consider when setting the assessment?
Those properties to the east are still more of an industrial zone. They don't have nearly the kind of development potential that the parcel 73 and 74 do. They're still more of a industrial-based zone. So the underlying highest and best use of those properties is different than that of the subject properties.
Did any of the testimony offered by Mr. Schramm raise any questions in your mind concerning whether or not the assessment as determined in your report is accurate?
No.
I'm sorry, I missed that. I missed the question. I heard the no part.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
the question related to whether any of the information you provided would cause him to alter his
Oh, okay.
decision, and the answer is no. One last question for you. Mr. Schramm also raised the issue of proportionality. To what extent, if any, was that factor considered by you?
Well, again, industrial properties that have a different highest and best use and intensity of use reflected a lower special benefit than the subject properties. We feel the proportionality in how we've done it in the report is fair and proportionate with other similarly situated properties.
I have no further questions for Mr. McCauley, Mr. Examiner.
Mr. Schramm, we were speaking of the distribution warehouse site, and you alluded to questions about the anchor store itself, which are on two parcels. Is that right?
Correct.
You indicate, okay. And the record reflects what those two are. First beginning at 262,304, the other one 359,700.
Correct.
And then more numbers, but just for the record, I wanted to indicate what those were. What is the basis of your appeal on the assessment with respect to the store?
The basis at the time that we got this, and again, timing being, considered, we needed time to see whether or not we felt we should present any further contestment for those two parcels. We, after looking at it, again, while we don't agree with the improvement values that are on there, has nothing to do with how this is allocated, nothing had to do how it's assessed at this point. It's simply the land, and again, we've been, as well as the other South Center mall property land values, we're being treated the same as everybody, and so we have no appeal to those two parcels.
Oh, so you are, out of caution, you filed an appeal for four
Correct.
parcels.
Yes.
Today, you're saying the two that represent the department store itself, I should consider those appeals withdrawn?
If I don't have to withdraw them yet, I would like to keep them active.
What evidence were you going to bring forward to contest it? And or were you going to make a request for you to do something?
We were considering maybe looking into having experts, but we again haven't had time to really consider that. So
You been to a wedding before?
Why is that?
Speak now or...
Oh, well, yeah.
You're here for Macy's.
Right. No, I understand.
Are you asking me for something?
For those two parcels at the, if this is the
Do
end
you
of
need time to do anything that you were going to identify for me?
today, on those two parcels, no.
Ever?
I can't say ever.
On behalf of the city, I have to enter an objection
And your objection would be?
that the parties who have filed objections are responsible for providing their proof unassisted by anyone or any line of inquiry that might lead them to some conclusions that otherwise did not bring to this proceeding.
Okay.
Oh,
So you haven't asked for anything and there's been an objection. Okay. Sustained. All right. Well, you have anything further on any of the four parcels?
that's all my presentation. Again, my consideration being the amount of an assessment on a particular parcel may not materially exceed the special benefits, which we feel like we've not, on our parcel, we have not gotten as big of a special benefit as the other properties there. And that the assessment within the district must be fair and rough, proportionate to all other assessments like ours. That's all.
I do have a question for the city representatives pertaining to the Macy's property. In the zoning question before and after, Will or has the zoning already changed for any properties on the mall, particularly Macy's? Did it change at all before or after?
The zoning map on page 5 of the study shows that the mall property is zoned TUC, as is the distribution property to the south. Next page, on page 6, is the urban center sub-area, or the south center sub-area zoning overlay. Those changes for the mall being a regional center and the distribution center being part of the Pond District are forthcoming later this year. It's a sub-area plan that's been worked on for the last 7 or 8 years, and it's finally coming to a conclusion later this year.
So there will be a change in zoning. If any of the city representatives know, will the airspace be available for development purposes on any of the properties at the mall, particularly Macy's, if you know? Mr. McCauley, did you consider that, or is that not something that came up?
I'm not aware of any reason why they wouldn't be.
You're not aware of any reason why it would
I'm
not be?
I'm not aware of any air right easement or anything precluding that.
Okay, all right. Anything further, Mr. Schramm? Okay, I will take your remarks under advisement. Mr. Deason, is the city concluding with its, or concluded with its, all right. You've reserved for rebuttal if at any point you have other materials, okay? All right, so Mr. Schramm, thank you very much. All right. Anybody need a break? We're okay? All right. Oh, no, 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 hey, I'm not putting time limits on you all, no. No need for it today. So, I need my list back. Here it is, right here. Mr. Scarbo said he didn't want to speak. I don't see him here. If he comes back, I'll call on him again. Mr. Rosenfeld, you're next on the list. Are you prepared? Do you need a few minutes to get yourself collected? Okay. All right. So, and Mr. Rosenfeld, you were here on behalf, I believe, of Andover West LLC?
That's correct.
All right. And that's is that parcel 91 at 435 Minkler Boulevard?
That's correct. It shows up as different addresses in different reports.
I'm noticing that.
The sign on the building is 435 Minkler, and that's what we know it as. It's parcel 91. Do you want me to point it out?
That would be very helpful. And if you don't mind, use descriptive terms so when we read it, we know where it is.
I won't draw on the map, but it is this parcel here at the corner of Minkler and Andover West.
Okay. All right. And if you would, please, I need to place you under oath.
We have no objection to marking up the map,
Yeah.
making things easier.
Thank you.
Subject property.
Okay. And if you would, sir, please raise your right hand.
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're going to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
All right. And I take it that what you said previously was also the truth.
I hope so.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll take that as a yes.
Okay.
All right. So just for me driving around, riding my bike in the area, what's there? What is that property?
Well, it is an industrial building, 126,000 square feet. It's been there since the 1960s. It has no sign on it, and I was a little coy in my letter because the tenant has generally requested anonymity. But for the purpose of these discussions, I can tell you that the building is entirely leased to Nordstrom. And Nordstrom has been there for over 20 years. They use about half the building as a distribution center for their Puget Sound area stores. It fills with merchandise, and then it goes out to the stores for new displays. In the other half of the building, they have a number of uses, one of which is making their Christmas displays every year. They also have a shop that makes the signs that go on their racks in the describing their merchandise for sales and other purposes. And they have a very interesting facility that matches stray shoes in shoe departments, and some of us have more experience than others. Particularly at sale time, it's somewhat chaotic, and shoes get separated from their mates. Nordstrom also has a wonderful policy that if your feet aren't exactly the same size, they will sell you different size shoes for your left and right foot. So they wind up with thousands, literally, of unmatched shoes, and have a very high success rate of repatriating them And I could go on. They also have a policy of accepting merchandise back that, from dissatisfied customers, and some of the shoes that come back clearly have been worn more than a few times, and they have a operation there to restore them if possible so that they can be sold again as well. Nordstrom's a wonderful company. We all know them and use their products, and these are good jobs, and I don't think anyone wants to do anything that would discourage them from continuing to have those jobs in that facility.
So Macy's is not the only big retailer with the strategy of not renting dead space at a major retail mall.
That's correct.
Yeah,
And,
Nordstrom does the same, right?
And the building is owned, just as background, it's a family-owned property. My brother and sister and I inherited it from my father, who bought it for his furniture business back in the 1960s. It's our only asset in Tukwila. We hope that Nordstrom stays there a long, long time. I'll talk in a second about highest and best use. The purpose of being here today is we're not against the LID. We understand that the neighborhood is changing, that rail is coming. We're supportive of that. We could argue that the traffic issues have been created largely by retail uses and less so by traditional industrial uses, but I'm not sure that would be productive at this point. We're prepared to pay our share. When I got the assessment, I noticed that our property, as I read this calculation here, is assessed at 29 cents per square foot of land area. And I noticed that the identical building immediately to the south is assessed at 10 cents a square foot of land area. So about 1/3 the assessment. The building immediately to the east is assessed at 19 cents. So that's about 50% less than our property, and all the other properties on the block, which is a large block of industrial buildings, are assessed at 10 cents per square foot of land area. As I said a second ago, we're not opposed to paying. We just like to pay a assessment that is consistent with other buildings at comparable locations, comparable size, comparable age, comparable use, and comparable assessed value. If you look at the assessed values of the other industrial buildings in south of Minkler, ours is within 10% of what all the other buildings are. So it's sort of, I think, an accident of the calculation process, which I do understand, that the assessment on our property came out to be 3 times that of the property immediately next door. Some of that goes to the question of highest and best use, and I have some expertise in this area since you've encouraged us to be candid and not. I've had 40 years in the real estate development business. I've built apartments, which I think is in many people's mind as to future uses of the South Center area, high-rise apartments in downtown Seattle, low-rise garden-style apartments here in South King County, condominia in South King County, as well as office and industrial and retail properties. And candidly, I think that the highest and best use for this property is what it is today. It's a very fine, simple, still state-of-the-art industrial building. As you know, as I said, Nordstrom uses it, and it produces relatively little traffic. There hasn't really been a change in the traffic it generates in the last 20 years. I don't anticipate a change in the next 20 years. And our request simply is that we be assessed at a millage rate, if that's the right term, comparable to the other buildings of similar age, size, use, and location within the district. And we're not going to build apartments there. I mean, I know what's going on here. We can all be, an urban planner in my sort of other life, and this neighborhood is changing. But I build apartments, and there's just no way that someone is going to buy our property today or at any time I can see, for quite a ways out, and spec a mixed-use project on it. It has an active freight line on the backside. It has freight tracks in front of it on Minkler. It has a big drainage swale that limits access onto Minkler. It's a perfectly good industrial building, and I hope that the city in its policy would consider blue-collar jobs, manufacturing jobs, distribution jobs, and support of retail, something that, shouldn't be zoned out of existence because it's not going to shift over. Nobody's going to want to rent an apartment or buy a condominium on that block or in most of the property in the lower southeast quadrant, I think, of the assessment area.
Anything further?
No, thank
Do
you.
have any exhibits or things other than your appeal documentation?
Well, I came in to, when I went to City Hall and I read the relevant parts of the book, I thought, and I went to the exhibit, and the only exhibit I came up with, which I can give you a copy of, is I just took the other properties around us, 90, 91, 92, 93, and I marked what they were being assessed per square foot compared to our 29 cents. So you're welcome to have this, but I think you probably wrote it, so you're probably pretty familiar with it. It just shouldn't be 3 times the assessment of the property next door.
Well, if that's what you're referring to, I'd prefer to have it as an exhibit. And that way, when I turn to your property, I'll have the document you refer to.
Apologize that it's handwritten, but I didn't come with fancy attorneys or.
Any
you know,
objection,
if it
Mr.
was-
Deason? No. And
You're
you
on
know-
behalf of my family and on behalf of Nordstrom's.
Being accused of being a fancy attorney.
We do our own outreach, so I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
And your appeal is a 2-page letter with an illustration attached, which may be what we're marking
Yeah.
now. And you had the Tukwila notices, and it's marked in my packet as Appeal C, as in Charlie, and we'll just keep it marked that way. By the way, Macy's appeal documents were labeled Appeal A, as in Apple. Scarbo was Appeal B. Peterson, the Houghton Properties, was D as in David. Lawless and Widewaters Group was E as in Edward. Edward Foster, the Archdiocese of Seattle one, is F as in Frank. G as in Gary was the Harris Klein appeal, and H as in Harold were the collection of Sigali property appeals. I'm going to keep those labels as they are, appeals A through H, and those are all entered into the record as well. Okay. Mr. Rosenfeld's concluded his presentation, so now if you would please remain, because the city representatives may have questions for you. Yeah. And you'll have some follow-up if they've raised questions, you want to make other remarks, that's no problem.
The city has no questions for Mr. Rosenfeld. He was very clear and precise. The city would, at the appropriate time, offer some response to his comments.
Would you like to reserve to the end, or would you like to do it now if it's more particular to this site? I defer to you all. What's better? And it may be you want to use your lunch break to figure that out.
Okay. I think we'll choose the latter.
Do it
course
all
of
at one
action.
time?
Well,
Go through? That's okay.
I think it's going to vary depending upon the nature of the testimony that's offered. Mr. Rosenfeld has identified a number of different properties and assessments that would probably require a little bit of time on our behalf, so that's why I'm suggesting we'll come back after lunch. But other testimony may not require much research, and I generally find it easier to deal with the properties all at once if it's reasonable to do so. So I would ask for some degree of flexibility from the examiner to determine whether or not to respond immediately following the objection or defer that to the end.
I have a question for city representatives based on what's been stated. We're hearing about zoning changes, and my understanding is none of the zoning changes have occurred right now. But you concluded that you were reasonably certain that these zoning changes are something really close we're going to get approved. How is your appraisal impacted if one or more of the property owners were successful in getting the city council to not adopt a rezone on various parcels? And I'm going to pick on these two because they're both distribution centers. How would that, and go ahead and elaborate, because this is a balloon, correct? And if I squeeze the balloon in one area, it gets bigger in another, meaning proportionality, you're going to have to throw the valuations up on other people if it goes down for some people?
The zoning on Mr. Rosenfeld's property, it doesn't significantly change with these improvements as it does compared to like the Montrachet property. So, and back to your question on somebody trying to not get their property or stop the comprehensive, I don't know if I've ever come across that when the zoning changes benefit and increase the value of the property. I've never come across a situation where a property owner comes in and tries to stop that. So in all my years of appraising, I haven't come across that, but perhaps it happens. But the zoning changes pertaining to Mr. Rosenthal's property aren't that significant compared to what the zoning is currently, excuse me.
Sir, do you concur?
Proposed zoning, as I see it, would allow mixed-use development up to 70 feet in height, which is a wonderful concept idealistically. I just don't think it's practically possible. And in this case, actually, the upzoning does have a detrimental effect because it raises the assessed value. It causes may trigger a disproportionate allocation here, and those costs become operating costs of our tenant. Nordstrom's, and the cost of doing business here, which is convenient to their employees and their stores, becomes increasingly expensive relative to their alternatives, which would be to go to Chehalis, for example, to replicate a building of this size and flexibility. Given the build out of the South County market is very hard to do. You'd be at least in Auburn, if not farther south, which creates a lot of other problems, environmental problems, access problems, delivery costs, and so on. So as a policy matter, and maybe this is a matter for the city council more than the people in this room, when you do you keep an industrial base, within King County, really? Because as it densifies, it's going to drive those uses farther and farther out, and with them, a certain kind of job. Not everybody works for a high-tech startup in downtown Seattle, and logistical problems for people who distribute merchandise, like Nordstrom's. I mean, I would argue that the upzoning actually causes problems in this case, cost problems, and we would be very happy to have Nordstrom's there for centuries. I mean, they're a good tenant, and they provide a good service. We're very happy with the property, but it's a city issue then of what do you want the south part of the planning area to be. But just upzoning it is not going to convert it overnight into Belltown or Bellevue. I mean, there's a lot of other uses like Nordstrom that have been there for a long time with good jobs.
Yeah, it's an overlay, not an upzone, and yeah, it's an overlay, not an upzone. And I'm not implying that we're looking at the highest and best use of your property as a mixed-use development. I think that the main reasons we had you slightly higher than the property immediately next door is just because you're a corner on a little more traveled, closer proximity to the interchange than the property immediately to your east.
But it's 50 feet over
I know, it's
a
not,
mile.
You're kind of a cusp.
It shouldn't be 3 times the assessment.
It's not 3 times assessment of the property immediate to your east, and you were kind of a cusp property. When you look at the properties immediately to your west, one's $2, the other are all $1.50 a foot in benefit. So you were kind of on the cusp there relative to the other properties, and that's why we had you slightly higher.
Well, I would ask you to take a look at
Sure.
it. There is an active freight line immediately to the east, and there is a freight line in the street in Minkler that cuts across our property, and a big biodetention drainage swale on the Minkler side, which the other properties don't have. If this were really the retail part of the assessment area, I could argue that a corner location, I would agree with you, has much greater value, but as a distribution center, I'm not sure it makes a bit of difference vis-a-vis, or if it does, it's a much smaller scale of difference relative to the property to the south, which I think was its twin when they were built in the 1960s. So that's simply my request, is that there be a little more parity between the numbers. We'll pay our share. We're happy with what you're doing, and wish you good luck in your judgment on this.
Well, I appreciate your comments.
Okay. Mr. Deason, anything further from questions? Or?
No, I would like to clarify a point that was raised here with regard to the zoning. Mr. McCauley referenced an overlay versus a zone change. I'm going to ask Mr. Giverson to explain what's going on so that we can eliminate any confusion that may have arisen.
Thank you.
So as Public Works Director, I'm going to try not to be confused with a planner or the planning director, but I know enough about this plan that's been going on for 7 to 8 years
this afternoon to make it
that
happy.
the existing zoning will remain in place, TUC, grandfathered in, and the zoning overlay of the Tukwila Urban Center sub-area will provide these districts as incentives for future growth. This property in question by Minkler and South will become a workplace district with incentives for that, and there's all kinds of incentives and restrictions. Compared to the mall and commuter rail area, where those will have transit-oriented development, regional centers and commercial corridors, and higher intensity of mixed-use development. So, in a nutshell, the zoning will remain the same.
And what is the purpose of the overlay in 25 words or less? I'm just kidding about that part.
Put my
He's an
planner
engineer,
hat on.
he can do it. He's not a planner, bro.
It's to revitalize the area and encourage growth and redevelopment to bring in mixed uses, basically, where the area is revitalized, where people want to work, play, and build, where warehouses are great, but I think since the 60s we've seen that trend from warehouses to retail. What we don't have in this area is a lot of housing.
So is it fair to say that the overlay is not a mandatory change in the underlying zoning that currently exists?
The way it's being proposed is not a carte blanche conversion to a new zoning where warehouses are outlawed. That's not the intent at all.
But based upon your comments, this sounds like the overlay, and correct me if I'm wrong, is more or less a zoning tool to create an incentive to encourage development?
That's correct.
Mr. Rosenfeld, does that help you at all?
Well, it does, and I think the general direction is quite admirable. The densification around the shopping center and the use of some of the surface land there is something that's being looked at across the country, really, with malls. The land along the river, I would say, as a developer, has clear development potential and would be an attractive place for people to live. I think it'll be a long time before, and we're in no hurry to switch to retail. We've seen a lot of our peers who have industrial buildings, switch them into retail. It creates a lot of traffic. It's just not, from our standpoint, not something we want to do. It's going to be a long time before there's housing, I think, in the southeast quadrant of the planning area. And then the city really has to ask, at what point do you try to preserve industrial land just because of its scarcity as part of the economy and the economic vitality of the region? Every city that's successful faces this problem of driving out uses like the Nordstrom Christmas display shop, which is not as glamorous as a mixed-use, multi-story building, but maybe sometimes a year just as important.
Or shoe matching.
Yeah. And that's something I think the city needs to balance. It's if you drive out all the industrial zone land, you're going to have a different set of problems than if you try to keep some of those, what I would call blue-collar working-class jobs and uses in the city. This is very light industrial. Industrial really, making Christmas displays and printing signs and storing clothing is not heavy industry by any means.
I have a follow-up from Mr. McCauley on this property. Mr. Rosenfeld's made representations that the development potential of this site is specially limited, or it has, and all properties have their own issues. But he's mentioned railway facilities, tracks, or whatever, and I think you said a swale or something. Say it's an acre and there's an acre next door that has absolutely no limitations. Did you factor that into your appraisal?
Well, I'd like to take into account what Mr. Rosenfeld said, talk to council, and then answer these questions at a later time.
That's fine. Just a general explanation of.
In general, yes.
I own
we
an
try
acre, but only a quarter of it is developable.
You have to understand too. We're valuing 270 some parcels, so
Yep.
there's issues relative to a particular property that we may not be aware of, or we didn't catch. And so I would like time to review Mr. Roosevelt's comments. I thought they were good, and respond at a later time.
And because you dealt in whole dollars of land appreciation, you get this situation where you either have 10 cents, 20 cents, or 30 cents, and there's no 21 or 19 or 17. That I think explains why it's such a radical step. And I know it'd be much harder to gradate it more finely, but I think that's mathematically why you got where you came out where you did.
Okay.
But we could not get the money to build apartments there today in any way. I mean, no debt, no equity. It isn't, and I can't see it for a long time being a mixed-use site. Whereas other places in this, without picking any numbers, you know, I think have great opportunity and should, you know, redevelop. Okay?
Do you have anything further?
No, thank you.
Okay. The city's reserved, and so you should stay for whatever, when they're ready to address
Okay.
yours and others. Let's see. I think we only have one more representative present who wanted to speak. Ms. Tupford, did you want to make your presentation now, or do you want to wait until after lunch? Why don't you come forward? Okay, let's get that, and we'll come on forward, and we'll let her continue until she concludes, and then we'll take our lunch break then. And to the city afterwards, you all need to let me know how much time you need to get ready to respond or whatever, okay?
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
As I-
Before that, I need to swear you in.
Oh, yes.
I know you're here for the Archdiocese, and I trust you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
So help me God, I do.
Thank you, ma'am.
As I mentioned earlier, we just obtained this property.
Why don't you introduce yourself? to
Oh,
the record?
Laura Tepfer, Seattle Archdiocese. I'm representing the Vietnamese martyrs who will hopefully be occupying this property as soon as their conditional use permit is approved. Yes, it's Toe, P as in Paul, F as in Frank, E-R. Well, I want to start out by apologizing that I don't have anything prepared because we only received this notice, this one here that told us what we would owe. And so I don't have, I have very little information about this project, as you can imagine, but I do feel that I feel compelled to be here on the behalf of the Vietnamese martyrs. Our assessment looks like it's quite a bit less than everyone else's, but it is still a large sum for a nonprofit church. So I just had some questions that I didn't know I would want to ask earlier because I've learned so much in the last hour. Regarding the valuation, so I guess I would address these to the appraiser, Mr. McCauley.
Do you have any presentation you'd like to make? Because we had questions, so why don't you give me your presentation about why you think your valuation is wrong?
Okay.
Or
Well,
needs to be changed?
as I mentioned, Examiner, I can't really say for sure that it's wrong because I've had no opportunity to prepare for you. All I had opportunity to do was submit our objection at the advice of the clerk's office so that I would be part of this.
Can I ask a question? How recently did the Archdiocese come into possession of the property, and how was it acquired, or has it always been held by the church?
No, it was purchased from Carlisle, the manufacturing plant. It was in process for several months, as you can imagine a big purchase like that is, and we closed on it February 4th. I should also add that is the date that I started working for the Archdiocese. So we had some things, merging at that time.
And I assume somebody did a title report?
Yes, in fact, we did have a title report.
I'll let you sue them outside of this premises, but
Well, just so for your information, I have done some research on that. We received a title report back in November. The preliminary title report, which was reviewed by the staff, by our architect, and by our realtor, did not include this LID the first go-around. A week later, we received another title report, and it was number 16. It was less than one line long. It included no values because I'm assuming that even though there was proposed values, the real values were not, or I should say the proposed fees, the real fees had not been disclosed yet, or I'm assuming they hadn't, I don't know. So we had one line, and it said, oh, by the way, well, it didn't say by the way, it said there will be an LID.
so it was noted.
It was noted. Again, I just want to make it clear that it was 1 week after the preliminary title report came in, the secondary one came in. It was not brought to our attention that this change had been made. And so unfortunately, the Archdiocese and the Vietnamese martyrs did not have an opportunity to, one, make sure it was paid off or used in the negotiations of the purchase price. So it was just a little bit of a shock for us to receive this bill. So that's why I am here. And I guess our best argument would be not so much the highest and best use of the property, because it's changing dramatically from a warehouse to a church. That being said, I know Carlisle employed 600-plus employees that obviously drove there 5 days a week, both morning and evening. Our impact would be considerably less as a church. We obviously have our services on Sunday. There will be some other programs, but it would not be the same impact that the Carlisle manufacturing plant would have imposed upon the roads and the streets. And that being said, I would think that the benefit would be less to us than it would be to Carlisle. So that is my basic case, if you will, on behalf of the Vietnamese. But my questions following that is, when you value, we mentioned that it's the highest and best use. Do you consider valuing a property at the highest and best use different than market value, or do you think they're one and the same?
Mr. Deason, do you have an objection?
Well, I do. At the same time, I would like to assist Ms. Coker in understanding what's going on. I'm wondering whether the time might be better used to do the questioning offline rather than as part of these proceedings. Because at this
That
point
would
in
be fine.
proceedings, it's for the presentation of the objection, not requiring city's witnesses.
But you would be willing to indulge a few minutes of some questions that might enlighten her on the process a little bit? And I'd appreciate it if we could. And if it gets a little long in the
Yeah.
tooth, I'm going to ask you to tighten it up. But so focus your questions with respect to your property, and Mr. Deason's kindly indicated that they'll,
Great.
let you go.
So earlier you were mentioning market value and highest and best use.
Correct. When you estimate market value, it's based on highest and best use. So we would look at the highest and best use of this property more industrial in nature rather than as a church, which I wasn't aware that
Right.
that was going on.
Understand.
But that would be more of a special purpose property. So it wasn't really a consideration that we had. But if, as in any property in the LID, if you are changing the use, assuming the LID was not in place, you would have had some mitigation costs relative to this improvement in order to get your permit to change the use of the property. And so that's kind of a special issue relative to your property, but we looked at it more on a market basis. So your $12,000 assessment was proportionate to other similarly situated properties with similar zoning in the marketplace and in the LID area.
And is this property scheduled to be rezoned?
Well, it is in that overlay zone, I believe. Yes.
And do you know at this time what that new zoning will be?
That would be in a map that's in the report that shows potential zoning. And I think that's what you previously spoke to, right?
Right, and I'd just like to clarify, it's not changing the current zoning, it's offering
It's an overlay.
alternatives to that.
Right.
And for further clarification, on page 6 of the appraisal report, special benefit study report, it shows the Tukwila Urban Center sub-area overlay, and this southeast quadrant is designated to become a workplace. So it does acknowledge the industrial nature of what's going on there, so.
And when we take a break, there are copies of that exhibit where if you
Great.
look at that, okay?
Great. No, I apologize for not having a better case, but again, this is the only document that we have received at all on any of this, so. And I did call the clerk's office and ask for information. I was led to a link, which did not include, at least where I looked, any of these values. So I had no opportunity to obtain this information prior to arriving today, but felt compelled that we should at least be on the record as objecting.
Just for your information, the information is available through the city's website. I don't know whether you were aware of that or not. So if you wanted to reference that or do some additional research.
I would like to at least have that opportunity to do some more research.
Well, you're welcome to, but
Are you saying that today is it?
would the city have an objection?
Yes?
If the city would have objection, I'd have to sustain that. This is the speak now or forever, hold your peace. Do you have any evidence or materials that you brought or appraisals or regarding valuation that would question the appraisal report that is in the record now by Mr. McCauley?
No, I do not.
Do you have any reason to question it, that it's inaccurate, mistaken?
No, as I mentioned, when I called the clerk's office, because I think you guys might think that I did not make these calls and inquiries prior to arriving today.
I
But
had
when
no
I
such
called the
assumptions
clerk's,
at all,
when
no.
I called the clerk's office, again, I was advised to just be here so that it goes on record that we would like to just have our property looked at and reconsidered, because I cannot provide you with any good argument except for that our impact in this area would be less than the manufacturing plant. But learning what I learned today, that it's strictly on market value, I'm guessing that, impact will not make an impact.
Do you have anything further?
No, I do not.
Okay, all right. And I would encourage you to remain for afterwards, because the
Right.
city's reserved the right to address multiple properties after they confer in things, and they may respond to something you've said later
Okay.
in the proceeding, okay?
Right.
All right. Any other property owners have a presentation? Did you come in while we were hearing from other people? I'm ringing the bell. Anybody? Okay, on your presentations? No? Okay. So we will wrap up the presentations from the property owners and their representatives, and we will take a lunch break now. How much time, Mr. Deason, would the city like? You need to eat, but you all also indicated you wanted to confer and prepare to respond to some of the remarks.
In light of the testimony that's been presented, that may not be necessary. If the examiner would indulge me about 5 minutes, I might be able to confer now. There may not be additional testimony offered on behalf of the city.
Oh, so
Yeah.
you're thinking the hearing might conclude at lunch?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Any objection? Not seeing any. Would you want to take 5?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
All right, we'll go back on the record at 5 to 12. Okay, we're off the record. Gentlemen, if y'all go ahead and take your seats, we're going to go back on the record. All right, and we have concluded the presentations by the individual properties that filed written objections and who are parties to this proceeding. You all have concluded your questions of city representatives who are present. The city's concluded its presentation, save its rebuttal or responses to anything any particular representatives have said or comments they've made today. And this is time that I had reserved for the city to respond if you choose to. So I turn the floor to Mr. Deason.
Thank you, Mr. Examiner. After conferring with my folks, we've determined that the information that's been presented so far is sufficient for our purposes. We do not feel the need to provide any additional testimony. And so our recommendation is that you close this portion of the hearing and we proceed along, knowing that we still have the Sigali property to review in the immediate future.
So because I had advised all representatives present that the city would be responding to any questions or as they chose at this point, were there any questions hanging out that anybody wanted to have answered on the record that you thought were going to get answered? The city's decided that they don't need to do it on the record. That's fine. That's their prerogative. But I'm ringing the bell one last time. Was there any fact or document that you all wanted to review or comment on before I close the testimony? Anybody? Okay. No one spoke up. So I will go ahead and at this point in these proceedings, I will close the record. No one's asked for an opportunity to submit any other exhibits or testimony. That time has now passed. I'm closing the record with respect to everyone present, save the Sigali Properties representative based on the stipulation with the city previously that those parties will be conferring with one another and will be following up with me as the hearing examiner with respect to those properties, whether your questions are addressed offline or you need to create a record, and we need to continue this hearing with respect to the Sigali parcels. You all will inform me of that. And you indicated it might be about 2 weeks?
That is our
minimal?
That is our best guess. During the most recent break, we discussed this, and everybody recognizes the sooner the better. So
So
we're going
here's
to
what I'm
endeavor.
going to do. I would appreciate it if the burden, I'm going to put it on the city, but on council, Mr. Decent, should it be you? All right, so the burden on the city to inform the city clerk every 7 days from today. Where are you? Do you see a window of opportunity to reach a resolution, or are you making progress, or is there gridlock? And every 7 days, today being Wednesday, so next Wednesday will be the first time, let the city clerk know, and she'll make contact with me. And I'll make a decision based on your progress report, if at all. And if we need to set a date to continue this hearing for purposes of considering testimony, evidence, and exhibits regarding the Sigali properties, that notice will be made publicly through the city clerk's office on the city's website. And that's all we need. So I advise everyone present, if you have an interest, you want to see things, watch the city's website for notice. There will not be individual notices sent to any of the property owners on the continuation, okay? If you have any questions, contact the clerk's office. After the Sigali properties are resolved, whether that means we need to have a continued hearing or they indicate that they're fine with things and the modifications that the city proposes are acceptable, whatever, I will then be informed of that fact, or we will conclude the hearing after Sigali, and then I will generate my report, which will include recommendations to the city council regarding the roll, whether it needs any corrections, revisions, whether anybody needs to have it raised, lowered, or changed, or modified. And that will be in the form of a recommendation that is to be made from me in writing to the city council, and the date the city council would ever consider that would be noticed on a city council public meeting schedule, which notices are available on the city's website through the city clerk. I cannot tell you when that would be right now, but based on what you've heard, it certainly won't be within 2 weeks. And it will probably take me 14 days at least to generate a decision after the Sigali properties are resolved. So we're looking at best case sometime in April that I would be issuing a decision towards the end, and it could be May. So watch the clerk's website, and if there's any information. In fact, there's you have a special page for LID 33 where all the information on this is so I encourage you all to make yourself familiar with how to find that on the LID 33 link on the city's website. Are there any other questions or remarks that anyone feels need to be made? Okay. Mr. Schramm?
Will we be notified individually, or should we just keep checking the website?
Well, what would you like to be notified of?
Any kind of resolution?
All right. On a decision that would come from me as the hearing examiner, that will be provided to you. Okay. And I presume that all of you have given an accurate email address. If you have not, I encourage you to share that with the city clerk to make sure that they have the right email address, and then all of the notices that you asked to be sent to you, that my decision is ready for issuance, can be issued. And that would be provided to you in PDF form. I usually upload the decision in Word format, but as a PDF document, and that way you'd get it in Cincinnati without having to wait on a FedEx box. Okay. That goes for all of the property owner representatives. Make sure you follow up the city clerk to make sure you have the proper email on there. Save shipping costs or delivery. Anything else? Okay, with that, I want to thank all the parties present and the witnesses that have testified today and the city representatives. Thank you for a civil proceeding and your respectful line of questioning. And I will take everything under advisement, and you'll hear from me when things conclude. Thank you very much. Have a very good Easter holiday weekend. We're off the record.
If you'd like to come forward and get your email addresses reviewed and be sure they're accurate, that would be very helpful.
I'll stick around and make sure I got my stuff. I'm not gonna bolt on.